Lucian Crowe didn't knock. He never knocked. He pushed through the door of the Millhaven County Clerk's office like he owned the floor beneath his boots, dropped a leather folder onto the desk of the man behind the counter, and said, without looking up, "Date it 14 months back. Make it clean." The clerk's hand trembled. He was 43 years old with 4 children, and a mortgage Crowe held the paper on. "Mr. Crowe, if someone checks nobody checks anything I don't want checked." Crowe finally looked at him. "Date it, sign it, and be grateful I'm still giving you a choice." Pen scratched across the paper. Outside, Ironwood Ranch had no idea what had just been signed away. This story already has you angry good. Stay with us. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss what comes next, because every story we tell is built to keep you up past your bedtime. Hit that like button, leave a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The hammer was the first thing people noticed. Not the woman carrying it, though she was the kind of woman people noticed whether they wanted to or not, but the hammer itself. Heavy, scarred at the handle, wrapped in a strip of dark leather, where someone's palm had worn the wood down to something soft and familiar. It swung at her side with the ease of a thing that belonged there. Not a prop, not a borrowed tool, but an extension of her arm the way a working man's calluses are an extension of his skin. Elowen Vance was 29 years old and had the face that made strangers stop mid-sentence. Green eyes the color of creek water in summer, chestnut hair she kept pinned but never quite tamed, cheekbones that could have belonged to a portrait hanging in a parlor in St. Louis. She was tall enough to meet a man's gaze without tilting her chin, and she walked the way people walk when they've been tired so long they've stopped fighting it, straight-backed, steady, each step placed like she was counting them. She stopped at the iron gate of Ironwood Ranch on a Thursday morning in late April of 1883 and looked at the sign above the arch, 2 words burned into a plank of dark oak, the letters still sharp. She had walked 6 miles that morning. The flour sack over her shoulder held everything she hadn't sold or lost to her husband's debts, 2 changes of clothes, a whetstone, a thin blanket, and a photograph she no longer looked at but couldn't bring herself to leave behind. She pushed the gate open and walked through. A man named Denny Pruitt spotted her first. He was 19, gap-toothed, and had been mucking the near pasture for 2 hours, with nothing interesting happening. He leaned on his pitchfork and stared. Then he forgot to close his mouth. "Hey," he called across to a man near the fence, "Hector. Hector, look." Hector looked. Hector was 34 and had been riding since he was 7 and considered himself a reasonable judge of things. He took in the woman at the gate, the hammer, the flour sack. "She lost?" he said. "She's coming this way. I can see that." Elowen walked up to the 2 of them and stopped. She looked at Hector because he looked older. "I'm here about the farrier work," she said. "Heard you've been running through them." Neither man said anything for a beat. The horse work," Denny said. "The farrier work," Elowen repeated. Same tone, shoeing horses. "I'm told you have a mare that's given you trouble." Hector let out a breath through his nose. It wasn't quite a laugh, but it was related to one. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "that mare put Roy Hutchins on his back with a cracked rib last month. Before him, Pete Garland." "Before him, I'm not Pete Garland," Elowen said. Hector stared at her. Then he pulled off his hat and scratched the back of his head, which was what he did when he didn't know what to say and didn't want to admit it. "I'll take you to Mr. Rourke," he said finally. She followed him across the yard without looking at Denny, who was still staring. Silas Rourke was 41 years old, built like a man who had spent his 20s in weather and his 30s making decisions that aged him early. His hair had gone to gray at the temples. His face was deeply lined in the way faces get when they've spent years squinting into sun and wind and bad news. He was standing beside the corral fence when Hector brought Elowen across, and he turned and looked at her with the flat, measuring expression of a man who had stopped being surprised by very much. He looked at the hammer. He looked at her hands, which were not soft. He looked at her face, and then quickly, deliberately back at her hands, because he was the kind of man who was aware of the things he noticed and didn't like being predictable about it. "You're here about the shoeing," he said. "I am. You've done this work before." 11 years. Started with my father-in-law before I married. Worked beside my husband until he passed. She said it flat without performance. 4 months ago, something shifted in Silas Rourke's face. Not pity, he was too careful for pity, but recognition. The kind that comes from knowing what 4 months feels like after a loss. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it, which surprised her slightly. "Thank you," she said. "The mare Black Fury," he said. "What's her real name?" He paused. "She doesn't have one." "We stopped naming her after she put the second man down." Elowen shifted the flour sack on her shoulder. "Where is she?" Silas looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression was working through a calculation she couldn't quite read. Then he pointed toward the far corral, set back from the others, the rails reinforced with extra timber, a gate that latched twice. "She's back there," he said. "But I need to be straight with you. She's already driven off 11 farriers, 2 of them experienced men. Roy Hutchins has worked horses his whole life, and she caught him across the ribs before he even got the first hoof lifted. I can't in good conscience, Mr. Rourke." Elowen didn't raise her voice. "Let me look at her." He stopped. "If I look at her and I think it can't be done, I'll tell you," she said. "I don't have a reason to lie to you. I need the work, but I need to keep my hands more." He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to his mouth, but she saw it in the corner of his eye. He nodded once and started walking toward the far corral. She followed him. The noise reached her before the horse did not a crash or a scream, but a low, steady percussion, the sound of something large, moving in a contained space without the intention of stopping. Elowen could hear the particular rhythm of an animal pacing. 3 steps, turn, 3 steps, turn. Tight, controlled, but beneath it something wound so tightly it had forgotten how to release. She heard the men before she reached the fence. 4 or 5 of them gathered along the rails at a respectful distance. Denny had followed. Hector had come around the other side. Broad-shouldered man, whose name she didn't know yet, leaned on the top rail with his arms crossed and said nothing, which was somehow louder than what the others were doing, which was talking. "Told you, Silas, we need to put her down. Roy's right. Horse like that, it's not worth the... There's ways to manage her. You just need more rope." Elowen didn't listen to the rest. She was looking at the mare. Black Fury, and she was black deeply, purely black, not a single marking, just that solid darkness from nose to tail, stood at the far end of the corral with her head slightly turned, not toward the fence where the men were gathered, but at a precise 45-degree angle that put both the men and the open space of the corral in her field of vision simultaneously. Her ears moved constantly. Her ribcage expanded and contracted in breaths that were just slightly too quick. Her tail was not raised, it was clamped, pressed against her hind quarters with the particular tension of an animal that has learned to make itself smaller in anticipation of something that hasn't happened yet. Elowen watched her for 90 seconds without moving. She watched the ears. She watched the eye that was visible from this angle, large, dark brown, rimmed with a thin line of white at the inner corner that came and went with each flick of those ears. She watched the way the horse's weight shifted ever so slightly onto her hindquarters each time one of the men moved along the fence. "Get everyone back," Elowen said quietly. Silas looked at her. "Away from the fence, far enough she can't see them." "Now, just a minute." The broad-shouldered man started. "Wade," Silas said, and something in his voice ended it. Wade pushed off the rail and stepped back, expression like a man who has swallowed something he doesn't plan to say anything about. The others moved with him, Denny reluctantly, Hector with his arms still crossed. 3 others who shuffled back with the universal body language of people who expect to watch something go badly wrong. Silas stayed at the fence. "You too," Elowen said. He looked at her. "Please," she added, because she wasn't oblivious to who owned the fence. He stepped back 6 paces, stayed where he could see. She accepted that. Elowen set her flour sack down against the outer fence post, unbuttoned her coat, and hung it over the rail. She left the hammer. She took nothing into the corral with her, except the knowledge she'd spent 11 years accumulating, and the particular steadiness she'd developed through 4 months of doing things alone that she had never expected to do alone. She unlatched the double gate, opened it just wide enough to step through, closed it behind her. The mare went rigid. Not aggressive, that was the thing Elowen noticed instantly, the thing the 11 farriers and Roy Hutchins with his cracked rib had probably missed. The mare didn't lunge, she didn't rear. She compressed, all that muscle drawing inward, spine dropping slightly, weight redistributing, not the posture of an animal preparing to attack, but the posture of an animal preparing to receive one. Elowen stopped where she was, 12 feet inside the gate, and did nothing. slowly, audibly not performing calm but actually choosing it, the way her father-in-law had taught her, the way she had practiced, on 100 frightened animals before this one. She let her shoulders drop, let her hands hang open at her sides. She turned her body slightly so she wasn't facing the mare directly, presenting her profile instead, which to a horse reads differently than a frontal stance. The mare's ears moved, swiveled toward her, then away. Then back. Elowen waited. Behind her, beyond the fence, she could hear the ranch hands doing what they always did when something they expected to go one way was going another. They got very quiet. 2 minutes passed, maybe 3. Time does strange things in the presence of a frightened animal when you've decided to stop fighting it. The mare took one step toward the center of the corral, then stopped, then turned her head away not in dismissal, but in the equine gesture that means I am showing you I am not a threat, which is also an invitation to respond in kind. Elowen turned her head away too. She heard Denny say something in a low voice. She heard Silas's response, also low, but the tone of it was enough sharp and final, and Denny shut up. The mare took another step, then 2 more. Then she stopped 8 feet away and breathed loudly through her nose, a long exhale that released enough tension to be visible in the way her neck dropped 2 inches. Elowen didn't move toward her. She let the horse make every choice. It took another 4 minutes, and in those 4 minutes, Elowen thought about exactly nothing except the horse in front of her, the angle of the ears, the quality of the breathing, the fractional relaxation in the massive hindquarters that told her the mare was downshifting out of pure defensive alarm and into something more complicated, more hopeful and more dangerous than alarm. Curiosity. The mare's nose came forward, touched the back of Elowen's hand. Elowen turned her palm up. The horse pulled back for a second, reading the change. Then came forward again, and this time her nose pushed firmly into Elowen's palm and stayed there, warm and quivering, and enormous, and absolutely still. Elowen placed her other hand against the mare's neck. The horse went still as a held breath. Behind the fence, nobody said anything. Not one word, because there was nothing that fit. Elowen stood with one hand under the mare's nose and one hand at her neck and spoke to her in a low, private voice, not commands, not coaxing, just the particular tone of one creature acknowledging another. She worked her hand slowly up the mare's neck, felt the muscle beneath the skin gradually release its grip on whatever it had been holding for what appeared to be a very long time. Then she went and got her hammer. She came back to the mare, worked slowly around to the left front hoof, ran her hand down the leg in the way that asks permission before it takes anything, and the mare stood. She shifted weight. She breathed hard twice, and once she pulled the hoof forward too fast, and Elowen had to wait her out. But she stood. First hoof, second hoof. She moved around to the right side, which took the mare longer to accept. The right side is usually the hard side, the side where most of the trouble has happened, and Elowen didn't rush it. Third hoof. By the fourth, she could hear someone crying quietly on the other side of the fence, and she was nearly certain it was Denny, who was 19 and gap-toothed, and apparently had a softer heart than his pitchfork suggested. Finished. She stepped back. She set the hammer down on the corral dirt. She looked at the mare, who was looking back at her with an expression that is hard to describe in the vocabulary of human faces, but which contained something that was not aggression and not fear, and was closer than either to relief. Elowen said quietly, "There you go." She walked back to the gate, went through, latched it twice, picked up her coat and her flour sack. She turned around. Silas Rourke was standing 10 feet away with his hat in his hand, which she would later learn he almost never removed. The expression on his face was not one she had seen on a man before. It was not surprise exactly, and it was not respect exactly, and it was not the particular look men get when a woman does something they didn't expect, which has its own species of condescension built into it, even when it's meant well. It was something simpler and more complete. It was the look of someone watching a thing they couldn't have described to themselves before they saw it. Wade, the broad-shouldered man who had swallowed something he didn't plan to say, had nothing at all on his face, which, on a man like that, meant more than the expressions the others were wearing. How, Silas said. Just that word. Elowen thought about the answer for a moment. Then she said, "Anything that's been hurt long enough learns to fight before it learns to trust." Silas was quiet for a beat. "Then what do you need?" "Room to stay, fair wages, and nobody goes in that corral without telling me first. Done, he said. She nodded. She needs a name, she said. A real one. I'll leave that to you. Elowen looked back at the black mare, who was standing at the center of the corral now, not pacing, not pressed against the far rails, just standing, head up, ears soft, the whole carriage of her body different from the animal Elowen had found 20 minutes ago. Midnight mercy, Elowen said. She walked toward the bunkhouse before anyone could say anything else. Denny wiped his face on his sleeve and pretended he hadn't. The bunkhouse Silas put her in was a converted storage room off the main building, small, clean enough, with a cot that didn't creak more than twice before settling, and a window that faced east, so the morning light came through early. She had stayed in worse places. She unpacked her flour sack onto the single shelf above the cot, the clothes, the whetstone, the blanket, and the photograph which she laid face down without looking at it, and sat on the cot's edge in the silence that always followed, being somewhere new. 4 months. She had been moving for 4 months, doing the arithmetic of grief alongside the arithmetic of debts, what she owed, what she could earn, what she would need to put 3 walls and a roof back between herself and the open air. Thomas's death had left her with a total of $8.70, a shoeing kit, and debts she hadn't known about until the men with paperwork started arriving at the door. She had sold what she could and paid what she was legally required to, and walked away from the rest, because there is a difference between the debts that are yours and the debts that belong to a man who is no longer there to answer for them. And the difference matters, even when the world treats them as the same. She was not bitter about Thomas. She had loved him in the way you love someone who is flawed, in ways you understand because you've spent enough time with them to know the shape of the flaws. He wasn't cruel. He was careless with money the way some men are careless with money, not maliciously, just congenitally, as though the connection between present spending and future consequence had a gap in it somewhere that no amount of experience could bridge. She had spent 11 years working beside him, partly for the love of the work and partly because someone had to be careful, and she was the one who could. Now she was the only one left to be careful. She lay back on the cot and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would assess the other horses. Tomorrow she would look at the tools in whatever passed for a shoeing station on this ranch and see what needed replacing. Tomorrow she would introduce herself properly to the men who would be working alongside her, with all the particular friction that involved, because she had done it before and knew the texture of it, the jokes that weren't quite jokes, the helpfulness offered in tones that weren't quite respectful, the constant background hum of surprise that eventually either faded or hardened into something else depending on the character of the men involved. Tonight she was just tired. She closed her eyes. From somewhere across the yard, she could hear Midnight Mercy moving in the far corral, not the tight, frantic pacing of before, but something easier. Still restless, but easier. She was asleep in 4 minutes. She had been at Ironwood 3 days when she found the ledger. Not found. Exactly, Silas hadn't hidden it. It was sitting on the corner of the desk in the main office, which she passed through on her way to the tool shed, because the direct route involved crossing a fence post that was still wet from the morning's rain, and she had learned on day 2 not to use it in wet weather. The office door was open. The ledger was open. She wouldn't have looked twice, except that Silas was standing over it, with both hands flat on the desk, and the expression of a man who has just confirmed something he had hoped to be wrong about. She stopped in the doorway. "I'm sorry, I'm cutting through." He looked up, his face closed quickly, the practiced way of a man who's learned to put things away before other people can read them. But not quite quickly enough. "Come in," he said. "Close the door." She came in, closed the door. "Sit down," he said. He sat. He didn't. He stayed standing at the desk with his hands on the ledger, and he told her the shape of the problem the way she suspected he didn't tell most people plainly, without softening it. Maybe because she had walked into his corral and done what 11 other people hadn't done, and he had recalibrated something about her in his mind. Maybe because he was tired, and the load was heavy enough that putting part of it somewhere else for a few minutes felt like the only thing available. Ironwood had a contract, 10 horses, fully shod and conditioned, and ready to pass the buyer's inspection, to be delivered within 12 days. It was not an unusual contract. Silas had fulfilled 3 like it in the past 4 years, but this one had a provision that the others hadn't. A man named Lucian Crow, who held debt against a portion of Ironwood's property, had attached himself to the transaction in a way Silas's lawyer was still trying to fully parse. The language in the document was dense, deliberately so, but the practical meaning seemed to be this. If the delivery failed, if the horses weren't delivered on time, in condition, at the specified standard, Crow had grounds to call the debt immediately. All of it, Elowen said. All of it. She looked at the ledger. He turned it toward her and let her look at the numbers, which she read the way she read everything without fuss, working through the figures until she had the shape of the thing. How many horses do you have ready now? She said. 4, he said. Maybe 5 if I push Jackson's colt. He's close but not there. The other 5 are behind. What's behind on them? Mix of things. 2 need their hooves reshaped before they can be shod properly. Past farrier left them grown out wrong. 1 has thrush in the left rear that's been managed wrong. 2 more just young and green and needing more conditioning work than I've had hands available to do. Elowen looked at the calendar pinned to the wall beside the desk. 12 days, 10 horses. I can get through the shoeing faster than one man could, she said. I know how to handle the thrush properly. That's not complicated. Just needs the right protocol. The reshaping is going to take time I can't compress. I know, he said. It's still possible, she said. 12 days is tight, but it's not impossible. Something in Silas's expression shifted. Not relief, not yet. But the particular look of a man who has been carrying a weight alone long enough that another person saying it might be survivable feels unexpectedly significant. I appreciate you saying that, he said. I'm not saying it to make you feel better, she said. I'm saying it because I did the arithmetic and it fits. He almost smiled again. This time, it made it a little further. All right, he said. She stood up. I'll start on the reshaped hooves tomorrow morning. Tell me which 2 they are, he told her. She went to the tool shed. She did not meet Bram Kessler properly until the 4th day. She had seen him before that he was one of the senior hands, 50s, weather-beaten, in the way of a man who had worked outdoors his entire adult life, with a face that didn't give much away. He was competent, clearly. The other hands deferred to him in the way you defer to someone whose competence you've witnessed long enough to trust without thinking about it anymore. He kept his own counsel. He nodded at Elowen when they crossed paths, and she nodded back, and that was the whole of their interaction until the 4th morning. She was working on the first of the reshaped hooves, a bay gelding named Copper, who was patient and a little bored, and seemed to view the whole process as an inconvenience worth tolerating when she heard voices from the other side of the fence that ran along the east pasture. She wouldn't have paid attention except that the voices were deliberately low, and things that are deliberately low have a particular quality to them that she had learned over years of being in places where people assumed she wasn't worth paying attention to listen for. She kept working on Copper's hoof. The voices drifted. One she didn't recognize, older, clipped, the voice of someone who had practiced authority long enough that it had become his natural register. The other was Bram's. She could tell, because she had been listening to the sounds of Ironwood Ranch for 4 days, and had attached voices to people the way she attached horses' gaits to horses, not consciously, just observationally. She caught fragments. Enough. The name Crow came through clearly. Then, before the 12 days are up, then lower, Bram's voice, faster than expected. Then the other voice, harder, see to it that changes. Copper shifted his weight. Elowen adjusted her grip on the hoof and kept working, because stopping would have made noise, and noise would have told them she was there. She finished the hoof and moved to the next one. The voices had stopped. She kept working. Her hands were steady. But inside her chest, something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite anger had settled in the cold, clarifying feeling she had developed over years of being in situations where she could not afford to be wrong about what she'd just understood. Someone inside Ironwood Ranch was working against it, and she had 12 days, -4, to figure out what to do about that. She didn't go to Silas immediately. That might have been her father-in-law's influence, or just the particular habit of mind that develops in a person who has spent years being the one in a situation who couldn't afford to be wrong. Going to Silas with overheard fragments meant going to him with nothing she could prove, and going with nothing you can prove to a man who is already stretched thin is the same as going with a problem and no answer, which is worse than not going at all. She needed to be sure. She started paying attention to Bram in the way she had paid attention to Midnight Mercy, systematically, patiently, through the accumulation of small details that individually meant nothing but together resolved into a pattern. The routes he walked in the evenings, the way he lingered near the east fence when the light was down, the fact that twice she saw a rider stop briefly at the far fence line and continue on, which could have been nothing and could have been correspondence. On the sixth day, she was certain enough. She was also certain enough to understand what Crow's plan required, not just the contract failing, but the failure being attributable to something he could document. The horses not being ready, the work being behind. The new farrier, specifically the new farrier being part of why things had gone wrong. She went to Silas that evening. He was in the office again. He looked up when she came in, and she could see he had been looking at numbers, because the expression was the same as before. "Close the door," he said. She closed it, sat down, and told him what she'd heard. He listened without interrupting. His face, as she spoke, went through a series of changes that he didn't entirely succeed in suppressing, not surprise. She noticed, not entirely, which meant some part of him had already suspected, but something harder. Confirmation is different from suspicion. Suspicion can live alongside hope. Confirmation cannot, Bram, he said when she finished. "Yes, you're sure," I heard his voice, "and I've watched him for 3 days." Silas looked at the wall. His jaw worked. Then he said, "Tell me what you've seen." "Not just heard, seen," she told him. When she finished, the silence in the room had weight. Outside, she could hear the ranch sound's distant hoofbeats, the creak of a gate, one of the younger hands calling something across the yard. Normal sounds. They had a different quality against the thing she'd just said. "I'll need to handle this carefully," Silas said finally. "I know," she said, "but you need to handle it soon." He looked at her. "You're not asking me to take it slow." "I'm asking you to be sure before you act," she said. "Not slow. Those aren't the same thing." He turned the word over. Then nodded once. The kind of nod that means I take your point and also means I'm going to be the one who decides how this goes, which she accepted because it was his ranch and his decision, and she had said what she came to say. She stood up. "Elowen," he said. She stopped. "Thank you for coming to me," he said. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," she said. "I need those 12 days to work. I'm not going to let somebody pull the floor out from under them." She went back to the bunkhouse. In the photograph on the shelf, face down, Thomas smiled at nothing. She didn't turn it over, but she didn't move it either. The rumors started on the 7th day. She heard about them from Denny, who told her with the particular earnest distress of a 19-year-old who can't decide whether to be embarrassed by the information or protective about it, and ends up vibrating somewhere between both. "People in town are saying he started again." "I don't think it's true," he said. "I want you to know that first." "Tell me what they're saying, Denny," he told her. The story circulating in Millhaven was that Elowen had come to Ironwood not looking for work, but looking for Silas. That a beautiful young widow, newly desperate, had calculated that a widowed ranch owner was a more productive target than honest labor. That the farrier work was a pretense, that whatever else she might be good at, her real skill was something else entirely. Elowen sat with this for a moment. It was, she had to admit, a well-constructed story. It had the particular elegance of a lie that uses truth as its skeleton. She was beautiful. She was a widow. She was newly arrived. She was living on the property of a widowed man. Everything in the story was verifiable. The interpretation layered on top of those verifiable facts was the invention. "Who started it?" she said. Denny shifted. "Don't know exactly. Came from town. Mrs. Parrish at the dry goods mentioned it to someone." And who told Mrs. Parrish? He didn't know. Or he did know and wasn't sure he should say. She decided not to push it. She had a reasonable guess. People like Crow didn't operate with their own hands when they could find other hands to use. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "What are you going to do?" he asked. She thought about it. "My job," she said. "Same as I've been doing." Denny looked like he wanted to argue with this response. She could see it in the way his brow compressed. But she was already walking back toward the horses, and whatever he was going to say didn't quite catch up with her. She decided to go to town herself on the 8th morning. Not to defend herself. She had made the decision long before she set foot on Ironwood that she would not spend energy managing what people chose to think about her based on her face. Thomas had spent their marriage saying she was too proud about that, and maybe he was right. But the alternative was a permanent position of justifying her own existence to whatever audience had assembled that day. And she didn't have the time. She went to town because there were supplies she needed, and because showing up and conducting herself exactly as she always did was, in the long run, the only argument she had any interest in making. She went to the dry goods store. She bought what she needed. Mrs. Parrish served her without making eye contact, which told Elowen enough about how much Mrs. Parrish believed the story she'd spread. She went to the hardware store and ordered a tool she needed replaced. She spoke to 3 people on the street who spoke to her, and to none of the others, and she held her head the way she always held it, not high with defiance, not down with apology, just level, the way it naturally sat when she wasn't performing anything for anyone. On her way back out of town, a woman she didn't recognize stopped her. 50-something, plain-faced, with the direct manner of someone who has stopped caring what her directness costs her. "You're the farrier at Ironwood," the woman said. "I am. I heard what they're saying about you." Elowen waited. "I also heard what you did with that black horse," the woman said. "Word travels in both directions." She held out her hand. "Clara Muth." Elowen shook it. "Elowen Vance." "I know," Clara said. "My husband ran a farrier operation up in Colby County for 30 years. I worked it with him the last 15. I know what it takes." She paused. "I also know what small men do when a woman does something they can't." Elowen looked at her. "You watch your back," Clara said simply. "Not because you did anything wrong, but because they're not done." She walked away. Elowen stood on the road for a moment. Then she shouldered her supplies and headed back to Ironwood. Clara Muth was right. She could feel it, the particular certainty that comes from understanding the shape of what's coming, even before you know the details. Crow wasn't done. She had 8 days to finish 10 horses. She had a spy being removed from the operation. She had rumors she hadn't been able to stop. Whatever was coming next, she needed those 8 days. She walked faster. When she got back to Ironwood, Silas had fired Bram. Bram had gone quietly, which worried her more than if he'd made a scene. Quiet departures from people with reasons to be angry are the kind that require a second door you haven't found yet. She looked at Silas across the yard and said nothing. He looked back and said nothing. They both understood the same thing. 8 days, 10 horses, one enemy who was now operating without the cover he'd had inside the fence. Elowen went to find Midnight Mercy. The black mare was at the near end of the far corral. Now she had migrated slowly over the past several days, drawn toward the fence closest to wherever Elowen was working during the day. Put her nose through the rail and breathed warm air onto Elowen's palm when Elowen came up to the fence. "I know," Elowen said quietly. "Me too." She rested her forehead against the top rail and let herself be tired for exactly 30 seconds. Then she went back to work. The day after Bram walked off Ironwood's property, everything got quieter in a way that made Elowen's skin prickle. Not peaceful quiet, the other kind, the quiet that settles in after something has been disturbed and hasn't finished moving yet. The ranch hands went about their work with the slightly elevated alertness of men who understood that a thing had happened without fully understanding what that thing meant. Denny swept the same section of the barn floor twice without noticing. Hector checked the east fence line in the morning and then again in the afternoon, which wasn't his usual habit. Wade said almost nothing at breakfast, which was slightly unusual, and almost nothing at supper, which was not unusual at all. But the quality of his silence had shifted it, had a listening texture to it now. Elowen noticed all of it. She also noticed that she was being watched more carefully by the remaining hands, not with hostility exactly, but with the recalibrating attention of people who have had a piece of their understanding of the situation removed and are in the process of building a new one. She let them watch. She had work to do. The 9th day brought the real problem. She found it at first light, before anyone else was in the barn. She had made a habit of checking the contract horses at dawn, not because she didn't trust the night hand, but because the first light of morning is when a horse's condition tells you the most, when they haven't been disturbed into hiding whatever discomfort they're carrying. She worked through the stalls in order: the bay, the roan, the 2 duns, working her way down the row with a practiced hand running down legs, checking hooves, watching how each animal bore its weight. The 3rd horse she reached was a well-built gray gelding named Stockton, who had been one of the cleaner job's good hooves, cooperative disposition, the kind of horse that made you feel briefly grateful to be in this profession. She ran her hand down his left foreleg and felt him flinch. Not dramatically, just a slight withdrawal, a tightening of the muscle above the knee. She crouched down. The shoe was fine, the nail line was clean. The problem was what she found when she worked a thin wedge between the shoe and the hoof wall, packed in there deliberately, carefully, in a way that would take a knowing eye to identify and had clearly been done. After dark was a material she had seen used maliciously once before in her life. Coarse grit pressed against the sensitive tissue at the hoof's edge. Not enough to lame the horse immediately. Enough to create inflammation that would build over the next 24 to 48 hours until the horse couldn't bear weight. Enough to make the shoeing job look wrong. Enough to look to anyone who didn't know exactly what to look for, like faulty craftsmanship. Her hands went still. She crouched in the stall for a long moment, one hand resting against Stockton's cannon bone, and did the arithmetic. Bram had left yesterday. Whoever had done this had come in during the night, which meant either Bram hadn't been working alone inside the fence, or he'd had access he'd retained even after leaving. And he'd had specific enough knowledge of her work to know which horses had been recently shod and were scheduled for contract delivery. She checked the next stall. Same thing. Left rear this time, different material but the same method. She checked every shod horse on the property before the sun had fully cleared the ridge. 4 out of 7 were compromised. All of them work she had done in the past 5 days. All of it made to look like her error. She stood in the barn doorway for a moment, with the light coming in gray and thin, and breathed the way she had taught herself to breathe when something made her want to put her fist through a wall. Then she went to get Silas. He came to the barn in his boots and coat over his nightshirt, which told her he'd moved fast. She showed him the first horse. She showed him the material she'd extracted, laid out on a piece of clean cloth on the stall door. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. 4 horses, she said. All ones you shod. Yes, he turned away from the stall and put both hands on the rail across the aisle and stood there. She could see the line of his back, the way it held the tension of a man calculating how much he can absorb before something gives. Can you fix it? He said. I can. It'll take time. I'll need to pull the shoes on all 4, clean the hoof walls properly, and reset. If I start now, I can have the first 2 done before noon. The other 2 by evening, if nothing else goes wrong. And the horses themselves. Stockton's already inflamed. He needs 2, maybe 3 days of rest and proper packing before I reset his shoe. That's a problem, she paused. We have 9 days left. It's still solvable. Barely, barely, he repeated. That's what I said. He turned around. His face was not panicked. She respected that. It was the face of a man who has been in difficult situations before and knows that panic is a luxury you can't afford when the situation requires thinking. What do you need from me? He said. I need you to figure out how someone got into this barn last night, she said. Because if it happened once, it can happen again. And I need to know if Bram had anyone else on the inside or if this was something he set up before he left. Silas looked at her steadily. I'll handle that. I know you will, she said. I'm just telling you what I need. He nodded once. Start on the horses. She started on the horses. It was the longest day she'd had since arriving at Ironwood, which was saying something. She pulled the shoes on all 4 animals by mid-morning, working through Stockton's discomfort with a patience she had to dig for, because underneath it she was furious, not the hot, reactive fury that makes you clumsy, but the cold, focused kind that makes you precise. Whoever had done this had handled these horses in the dark, had put their hands on animals that were not theirs to touch, had caused deliberate pain to creatures that had done nothing wrong, and had done all of it not out of anger, but out of calculation. That was the part that made her cold, the calculation. She was packing Stockton's treated hoof when Denny came in with a bucket of water and stood for a moment not saying anything, which meant he wanted to say something. Whatever it is, she said, just say it. People are saying you damaged the horses, he said. In town. Someone's saying the horses started going lame because of bad farrier work. Kept packing the hoof. When did that start? This morning. Mrs. Parrish's husband was at the feed store, he told Walt Briggs. Walt told, it doesn't matter who told who, she said. When? Before anyone in town could have known about it, he said carefully. Because even we only knew about it an hour ago. She lifted her eyes from Stockton's hoof and looked at Denny. He was 19 and gap-toothed and not stupid. He had just told her something important, and he knew he had. Thank you, Denny, she said. He left the bucket and went back to his work. The news was already in town before the sun was fully up, which meant someone had sent word the previous night, someone who knew what had been done to the horses, because they were the one who had done it. or because they had watched it being done, which meant the campaign wasn't just sabotage, it was orchestrated. Physical damage to the horses and the reputational damage to her had been planned to arrive simultaneously, each making the other more believable. She thought about Crow's voice, the way she'd heard it through the fence, practiced authority of it, the patience in it. This was not a man acting in anger. This was a man executing a plan he had been building for a long time. She finished Stockton's packing and moved to the next horse. By midday, Hector appeared at the barn door with a tin cup of coffee she hadn't asked for. He set it on the rail without saying anything and started to leave. "Hector," she said. He stopped. "You've been here 5 years," she said. "You know Bram better than most." He turned around slowly. His arms crossed in the automatic gesture of a man being careful. "We work together," he said. "That's different from knowing someone. Did you ever see him meet with anyone outside the ranch, privately?" Hector was quiet for long enough that she knew the answer was yes. "A man on a dark horse," he said finally, "east fence. Maybe 4 or 5 times in the past 2 months. I figured it was personal business." He paused. "I should have said something." "You didn't know what it was," she said. "No," his jaw tightened, "but I knew it felt wrong." She picked up the coffee cup. "You're saying something now." He nodded once, and his arms uncrossed, and he went back to his work with something about him that was slightly less compressed than it had been all morning. Not resolved, but moving. Silas came back to the barn in the early afternoon. He had a look on his face she hadn't seen before, not the weight-bearing expression she'd become accustomed to, but something sharper. He waited until she'd set a hoof down before he spoke. "The night hand," he said. She looked up. "Travis Yount, 20 years old, been with us 14 months. He paused. "His mother has a loan with the Millhaven Bank. He came to me this morning. Cried through most of it." He looked at the barn floor. Someone told him the loan would be called if he didn't leave the rear gate unlatched 3 nights this week. He did it twice before he couldn't stand it anymore. Elowen straightened. "Did he see who came in?" "No. Just left the gate. Didn't look." She exhaled. "He's 19 years old, and someone threatened his mother's home to get him to open a gate. I'm not going to be the one who decides what happens to him." "I already told him he still has his job," Silas said. "And I told him if he hears anything else, he comes to me before he does a single other thing." He looked at her directly. "I'm also having the locks changed on every gate tonight." "And the bank," she said. His expression shifted. "What about it?" "The loan," she said. "The bank that holds Travis's mother's loan." "Do you know who owns it?" The silence that followed had a very specific quality to it. She watched him put something together that he hadn't quite assembled before, and she watched the moment it assembled. And the look that crossed his face after was one she recognized, the particular expression of a person who has just realized the problem is larger than the fence line they'd been looking at. "Crow has a stake in Millhaven Savings and Trust," he said slowly. "Does he?" she said. She went back to the hoof she was working on. Silas stood in the barn for another minute, and then he left without speaking again, moving with the particular purpose of a man who has something to do and is going to go do it. By evening, she had all 4 horses treated and reevaluated. Stockton was still the concerning one. The inflammation needed time, and time was the one thing she didn't have more of. She gave him the best she could. Proper packing, a poultice she'd made from what was in the ranch's medicine chest, a clean wrap, and the instruction to Denny, who would be on night watch now that Travis's role had been reassigned, to check on him every 2 hours and tell her if anything changed. She ate supper late, alone in the barn, with a plate Hector had left at the door without comment. Food was lukewarm, and the coffee was cold, and she ate every bite of it because she hadn't eaten since early morning, and her hands needed to be steady tomorrow. Midnight, Mercy watched her from the far corral through the open barn door. The black mare's outline was just visible in the dusk, the particular silhouette of that large head, those alert ears catching the last of the light. "I know," Elowen said toward the open door. The mare's ear swiveled. "I'm not done," Elowen said. "I just need a minute." She finished her supper and went to check Stockton one more time before she slept. The town's opinion of her, meanwhile, had developed in the way that town opinions do not in a straight line, but in the complicated, overlapping way of a thing that has multiple sources feeding into it simultaneously. The story about damaged horses spread quickly because it had legs, a beautiful young widow, no established reputation, doing skilled work people were inclined to doubt her capable of, and suddenly horses going lame. It was a story that confirmed what a certain kind of person already wanted to believe. But Clara Muth, it turned out, had been talking too. Elowen didn't know this until the 10th day, when a woman she'd never met came to the ranch gate and asked for her specifically. Middle-aged, wearing the apron of someone who had come directly from work to ask a question that couldn't wait. She introduced herself as a friend of Clara's and said, without preamble, Clara says you're being set up. She wants to know if there's anything the Women's Committee can do. Elowen stared at her. The Women's Committee. We organize things, the woman said, with the mild authority of someone who has been organizing things for years and is slightly impatient with people who didn't know. Petitions, letters. Last year we got the county to pave the road past the schoolhouse. She paused. We can also make noise when noise is what's needed. Elowen thought about this. I don't need noise yet, she said. But I might, in a few days. Is that something that can wait until I know what I'm asking for? Clara said, you'd want to be sure first, the woman said, with what sounded like approval. Yes, we can wait. She handed Elowen a folded paper with an address on it. When you know what you need, come there. She walked back toward town. Elowen stood at the gate for a moment, looking at the paper. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her coat pocket. On the 10th day, Stockton was better. Not completely, not better enough to be shod today, but better enough that when she pressed carefully around the treated area, he pulled back less, and his breathing stayed even. 2 more days of careful management, and she could reset the shoe. The math was still possible, but it had no room left in it for anything else to go wrong. She said this to Silas at breakfast. He said, then we make sure nothing else goes wrong. We've been doing that, she said. That hasn't stopped things from going wrong. He looked at her across the table. The other hands were eating and not obviously listening, which meant they were obviously listening. What do you need? He said. Somebody watching the horses at night who knows what to look for, she said. Not just someone checking the gate is latched. Someone who knows when an animal's breathing pattern changes, who can tell the difference between a horse shifting in its sleep and a horse responding to something outside its stall. Do you want to do it yourself? He said. I can't, she said. I need my hands working during the day. If I'm up all night, I'll make a mistake on a hoof that I can't afford to make. She paused. You have a hand here who grew up with horses, who knows them the way you have to know them. One of those people. Hector, Silas said. Hector, she agreed. Silas looked at Hector, who was eating his eggs at the far end of the table and pretending not to hear. Hector, he said. Hector put his fork down. I heard, he said. I'll do it. And that was that. Elowen spent the 10th day working on 2 of the remaining horses, Green and Young, still learning to hold still under a tool anywhere near their feet. Requiring patience, she administered in careful doses, alongside the experience of knowing when to stop and give an animal a moment to understand that it had survived the last 30 seconds without anything bad happening to it, which is actually the key skill in working with any frightened creature, and most people never figure it out. By the afternoon, she had one of the 2 fully shod to a standard she was satisfied with, and the other 3/4 of the way there, and the math had changed again. Now barely possible had become possible. Contingent on Stockton cooperating in 2 days and the remaining 2 horses going smoothly. She also had 2 visitors to the ranch that she didn't expect. The first was a man she recognized from town, Sherman Glatt, who ran the hardware store where she'd placed the tool order on day 8. He came to the gate mid-morning and asked to speak with Silas, and she directed him to the main house, and as he passed, he said to her, quietly, and without quite looking at her, I told Mrs. Parrish she should be more careful about what she repeats. I thought you should know somebody said that, she said. Thank you, Mr. Glatt. He went on to the house. The second visitor arrived in the early afternoon and was not a friend. He came on horseback, well-dressed, with a deliberateness to his movements that reminded her of the voice she'd heard through the fence, the voice of someone who has practiced his authority so long it has become structural. He stopped his horse at the gate and looked at the yard with the particular gaze of someone calculating the value of what they're looking at. She had stepped out of the barn at the wrong moment and was visible before she could decide whether she wanted to be. He looked at her. Lucian Crowe was, she estimated, somewhere in his mid-50s, lean, well-kept, with the careful appearance of a man who understood that appearance is its own form of argument. His face was not unkind in a surface reading, which was the worst kind of face for a person doing unkind things. The eyes were the tell. They had the flat, calculating quality of a man who is always measuring. He looked at her, the way men sometimes look at beautiful women, not with desire, but with something cooler and more insulting than desire, the look of a man tallying an asset he thinks he understands. "You must be the widow," he said. She said nothing. "I came to speak with Rourke," he said pleasantly. "Is he in?" "I'll tell him he has a visitor," she said. She went to find Silas, and as she walked, she could feel Crow's gaze on her back, and she thought, he came here to look at the situation. He came here to read what's in the yard, who's working, how the horses are standing, how close we are to the deadline. Came here to see what else might need doing. She told Silas, who was at the gate. She watched his face close. "Stay close," Silas said quietly. "Close to where?" she said. "Close enough to hear," he said. She went back to the barn. She did not go inside it. Silas went to the gate. She watched from the barn doorway as the two men spoke, Crow still mounted, which was itself a choice, putting him at a height advantage, framing the conversation as an interruption rather than a meeting. She was too far to hear the words, but she could read the physical language of it clearly enough. Silas standing with his weight evenly distributed, arms loose, not aggressive but not deferential. Crow making a point with one hand, Silas responding. Crow's posture shifting, just slightly recalibrating. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Crow turned his horse and rode back out without looking at the barn. Silas came across the yard. He wanted to know if we'd be meeting the contract, he said. What did you tell him? That we'd be delivering on time, and he should prepare to have his papers ready. He paused. He didn't like that. No, she said, he wouldn't. She looked toward the road where Crow had gone. He didn't come here for the answer, she said. He came here to read the yard. I know, Silas said. He'll do something else, she said. Before the 12 days are up. Whatever he hasn't done yet, he'll try. Silas looked at her. His jaw was set. Then we'd be ready for it. She went back to the horse she'd been working on. That evening, she was near the far corral when Midnight Mercy came to the rail and pressed her nose against Eloin's shoulder with the considerable weight of a large animal that has decided you are safe. Eloin turned and put her hand on the mare's face, her palm against the broad, warm expanse of bone and muscle below the eye. You know, don't you? She said quietly. You know something's wound up. The mare breathed against her neck. Eloin thought about Thomas. Not with the usual weight, not with the grief that still lived in the center of her chest, like a stone she'd learned to carry, but with something more specific. The memory of the first time she'd worked beside him on a frightened horse. The first time she'd seen that what she had with animals wasn't common, wasn't something everyone had. He'd looked at her that day the way Silas had looked at her in the corral. With that particular expression of watching something you can't explain and have stopped trying to explain and have simply decided to trust. She missed him, imperfections and all. And then she put it away because there was tomorrow to think about and Stockton's hoof to check in the morning and 2 more horses to finish and Crow out there somewhere running the same calculation she was running from a different direction. The 11th day started before dawn. Hector met her at the barn with a face that told her something was wrong before he opened his mouth. Stockton's better, he said. He's fine. That's not it. What is it? She said. Someone rode through the yard around 2 in the morning, he said. I saw them from the loft. Didn't come through any of the gates. I checked every lock. Came over the south fence somehow, rode slow around the yard, and left the same way. Nothing was touched. He paused. But they were looking. She considered this, taking inventory, she said. She looked toward the south fence. You didn't go after them. Wasn't sure what I'd be going after, he said. Figured one man alone in the dark, if they had company somewhere I didn't know about. You were right to stay, she said. That was the right call. He looked slightly relieved, which told her he'd been second-guessing it since 2 in the morning. She shod Stockton by 10 o'clock and stood watching him, walk the pen afterward, with the close attention of someone who cannot afford to be wrong about what they're seeing. The movement was clean. Not perfect, he had a slight favoring she wanted to monitor through the day, but clean. She felt the tension in her shoulders release by exactly the amount necessary to continue functioning and no more. 9 horses shod, 1 remaining, 1 day and a half. The final horse, a young blue roan mare, the hands called Sister, for reasons nobody could fully explain when she asked, had been giving everyone trouble with her feet for months, stepping, pulling, requiring 2 people to manage her through a basic trim. She was not mean. She was, in the assessment Eloin had built over the past week of observation, simply terrified of a specific sound, the metallic ring of a tool hitting the anvil, which happened to be the unavoidable sound of farrier work. Eowyn had spent 4 of the past 11 days building Sister's tolerance for that sound from a distance, working at the anvil in the far end of the yard while Sister was turned out nearby, letting the sound exist in the mare's world without any other pressure attached to it. She had noticed the mare's ears swivel toward the sound and then relax. Not full relaxation, but a progression. Today she would find out if it was enough. She brought Sister into the shoeing area alone. The hands had learned by now to give her the space she asked for without requiring an explanation. Sister was tense from the moment of entering, neck high, eyes showing white at the edges. Not exploding, just braced. Eowyn stood at her head for a long time without picking up a single tool, just being there, letting the horse recalibrate to her presence. She spoke in the low, steady voice she used with all of them, no words in particular, just the sound of a person not in crisis, which is what a frightened animal most needs to hear when it is. 10 minutes in, Sister put her head down 2 inches. Eowyn picked up the hoof knife. The ring of metal on metal when she set it down was clear and sharp, and Sister flinched hard, the whole body tightening at once, but she didn't pull away. Her feet stayed on the ground. Her breathing went ragged for a moment, and then, with visible effort, evened out. "I know," Eowyn said. "I know it's loud. You're okay." She lifted the first hoof. It took 1 hour and 40 minutes to shoe all 4 feet, which was 3 times what it would have taken with any of the other horses. By the end of it, Eowyn's lower back was screaming, and her shoulders had a specific ache that she knew from experience would be worse tomorrow, and she was also aware that she didn't care, because Sister was standing in the shoeing area with 4 clean, properly fitted shoes, and her head almost all the way down, the posture of an animal that has worked through something difficult and come out the other side still in one piece. Eowyn put her tools down and put both hands flat on the mare's neck. "Good," she said. "That was good." She walked out to find Silas. He was in the yard. He saw her face and said, "Sister?" All 10. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the ground, then at the sky, the way a man does when he's collecting something back that he'd given up expecting to get. "All 10, he said. "All 10, she said. "Stockton I want to monitor through tomorrow before I sign off on him for the delivery." "But he's looking clean." Silas nodded. He opened his mouth and then closed it, which was unusual for him. "You were going to say thank you," she said. "I was," he said. It felt inadequate. "It is," she said, without heat. "But say it anyway." He looked at her directly. "Thank you, Eowyn." She nodded. "We still have a delivery to make," she said. "And I still think Crow is going to try something before we get there." "I know," he said. "So let's think about that tonight instead of celebrating." He almost smiled. "You're a hard woman to celebrate with." "Ask me again in 15 days, she said, "when the money's in the bank and Crow's papers are worth nothing." She went to check on Stockton, but the celebration she wouldn't allow herself didn't stop the relief from being real. Somewhere underneath the vigilance, underneath the cold arithmetic of days remaining and obstacles still ahead. She had done what she came to do. She had worked 11 horses in 11 days, under conditions that had been engineered to defeat her, and she had not been defeated. The night was quiet. Hector was in the loft. The locks were new. The horses breathed in their stalls. She lay on her cot in the converted storage room and looked at the east window, where the morning would come early. And she thought about what Crow might do next, and she thought about the folded paper in her coat pocket with the address on it, and she thought about the county clerk's office and the paperwork Silas's lawyer was still trying to parse, and she thought about the particular quality of Crow's eyes when he'd looked at her at the gate, that flat, calculating look, the look of a man tallying something. He had been tallying. And she had the feeling, strong enough to keep her from sleep for another hour, that whatever he'd calculated from looking at the yard that afternoon had produced an answer, and that the answer had changed what he planned to do next. She turned over on the cot. The photograph was still face down on the shelf. She reached up and turned it face up for the first time in 4 months. Thomas smiled at nothing in the way photographs capture people smiling slightly off, slightly still, like a thing just this side of alive. "I did it," she said quietly. 11 horses in 11 days. Under the circumstances, the photograph said nothing, which was all it had ever been able to do. She turned it back down, not because she was finished with it, because she had said what she needed to say, and that was enough for tonight. and tomorrow would require her to be the kind of person who sleeps when she has the chance. Outside, Midnight Mercy moved once in the dark, a soft sound, and then was still. Stockton passed her final inspection at 7 in the morning on the 12th day. She had been in the stall with him since first light, working through the assessment the way she worked through everything methodically, without rushing, because rushing is how you miss the thing that matters. She ran her hand down each leg in sequence. She watched him bear weight. She watched him walk the length of the stall and back. The slight favoring from 2 days ago was gone, replaced by the clean, even movement of an animal that had been properly treated and properly given time to heal. She stood back and looked at him for a long moment with her arms folded, the way she stood when she was making a final decision and wanted to be certain she wasn't talking herself into something. She wasn't. All right, she said. To Stockton, not to anyone else, because there was no one else in the stall. You're done. She went to find Silas. He was already in the yard. He had been in the yard since before she woke up. She suspected she had heard boots on the boards outside her door at some point in the pre-dawn hours and had recognized the pattern of them, that deliberate, unhurried pace that Silas used when he was thinking through something he hadn't finished yet. He was standing near the fence of the main corral with a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold, looking at nothing in particular with the focused expression of a man looking at something very specific inside his own head. Stockton's clean, she said. He turned. Read her face. Something in his own face shifted, not relief, exactly, because the relief had a wall in front of it made of everything they still had to do before they could afford to feel it. The wall moved slightly. We move tonight, he said. Tonight, she agreed. Before sunrise. I want to be 2 hours out before the light comes up. He looked at the sky, the deep pre-dawn dark of it, and then back at her. Crow's going to hear we're moving early. Yes, she said. You want him to. She met his eyes. I want to choose the ground, she said. Not him. He was quiet for a moment, then, get some sleep. We ride at midnight. She went back to the bunkhouse. She did not sleep. She lay on the cot with her eyes closed and ran through the route in her mind, the road to the buyer's ranch, the terrain she'd had Hector describe to her in detail 2 days ago because she had been thinking about this for 2 days. Places where a road narrowed or a canyon pressed close on both sides, or the ground fell away in ways that made movement predictable. The places where someone who wanted to stop a delivery would position themselves if they were thinking the way Crow thought. There was one. A narrow canyon crossing about 4 miles, out a place where the road squeezed between 2 rock faces and a stand of old cottonwood, a bottleneck that any driver of horses had to take slowly. She had asked Hector about it specifically. He had described it without understanding why she was asking, and she had listened and said nothing and remembered every detail. If she were Crow, that's where she'd be. She got up at 10 o'clock, dressed, and went to check the horses one final time. All 10 of them stood in their stalls with the particular quality of animals that have been well treated and well fed and are simply waiting for whatever comes next. She moved through the stalls quietly, running a hand along each neck, checking nothing specific because there was nothing left to check, just making the rounds the way you make them when something matters enough to do it twice. Midnight Mercy heard her from the far corral. She could tell because the quality of the silence from that direction changed, the particular listening silence of an animal tracking a familiar sound. She went to the far corral fence before she left the yard and put her hand over the rail. The mare came to her immediately. We're moving tonight, Elowen said against the warm darkness of the mare's neck. I'll be back. The mare pushed against her hand. I know, Elowen said. I'll be careful. She went inside to wait for midnight. The crew that rode out at 12:15 was not large. Silas at the front with Wade, who had said almost nothing for 12 days, but whose particular usefulness in a physical confrontation was a fact that didn't require conversation. Hector, who had asked to come with a brevity that made the asking feel like a statement. 2 other hands whose names were Cord and Emmett, both of them quiet, capable men who had been at Ironwood long enough to understand that what they were doing tonight mattered. Denny had also asked, and Silas had told him to stay and watch the property, and Denny had argued for exactly 30 seconds before the look on Silas's face ended the argument, and he was currently in the loft where Hector usually sat, doing the job he'd been given with the slightly martyred air of a 19-year-old who knows he's been kept home for legitimate reasons and resents them anyway. And Elowen, riding on a gray horse named Cowboy, who was steady and wide-chested and took the dark road at a pace she could work with. The horses were led in a line behind 2 wagons, 5 to a wagon, the night air cool and carrying the smell of coming rain. The road was good for the first 2 miles wide, clear, the kind of road that gives you no reason to think about it because it isn't asking anything of you. Elowen rode beside Silas at the front and kept her eyes on the dark beyond the lantern light. "You've been watching the road," he said. It wasn't a question. "Since the 11th day," she said. "When did you know about the canyon crossing?" "I suspected it on the 11th day. I was certain on the 12th. He was quiet for a moment. "You didn't tell me." "I didn't want to plan for it until I knew we'd make it to the 12th day," she said. "Planning for a confrontation before you know you have anything worth confronting for is bad arithmetic." He considered this, and now we have something worth it. 10 horses, properly shod, moving toward delivery a full day early. She paused. "Yes, now we have something worth it." The road narrowed at the 3-mile mark, just as Hector had described. The cottonwood trees closed in from the left, and the rock face came in from the right, and the moon, which had been cooperative until now, moved behind a cloud that had no business being there at this particular moment, as though the landscape itself had decided to cooperate with Crow's timing. The wagons slowed, had to the passage required it. Elowen heard them before she saw them. Not horses, not yet just the particular quality of silence that exists when several people are trying very hard to make no sound, which has its own texture, the held breath quality of a space that is waiting to exhale. Silas raised his hand. The wagon stopped. 3 seconds of silence. Then, from around the narrow bend in the road ahead, the slow creak of a wagon wheel that someone had tried to break and not quite managed. "There," Wade said very quietly. It was the most she'd heard him say in 12 days. Silas's hand went to his rifle without drawing it. The gesture of a man who wants to know it's there, not a man who has decided to use it. She noted the difference. She had been watching Silas for 12 days now, and she knew the difference mattered. He was not a man who reached for violence as his first answer, which was either going to be an advantage tonight or the thing that cost them. "Let me go first," she said. Silas looked at her sharply. "Not ahead of the wagons," she said, alongside. "I want to be visible when we come around that bend." "Elowen, he's not going to shoot a woman in front of witnesses," she said. "And whatever he has around that bend, it's witnesses. He operates in daylight with paperwork and lawyers. He puts other people between himself and the violence. That's who he is." She paused. "So let me go alongside. Let him see me. Let everyone around that bend see me." Silas stared at her for a long moment. She could see him working through it, the instinct to say no, the practical understanding that she might be right, the discomfort of both. "You stay within arm's reach of the wagon," he said. "I will," she said. He looked at Wade. Wade nodded once. They moved. Around the narrow bend, the road opened into the small flat area that Hector had mentioned, not wide, but wide enough for wagons to have pulled across it and stopped, blocking the passage. 3 wagons, 2 of them farm vehicles of the kind that could have belonged to anyone, positioned at angles that were not accidental deliberate geometry, the geometry of a blockade. The third was a lighter rig, and beside it, on horseback, sat Lucian Crow. He had 4 riders with him, men she didn't recognize, the particular type of men that men like Crow find when they need bodies that won't ask questions about the work. Hard-faced, watching the approaching line with the alert attention of people being paid to be present and ready. And beside Crow, on foot, hands in his pockets, standing in the way of a man who is not entirely comfortable with where he's standing, but has committed to it anyway, Bram Kessler. Elowen felt Silas go rigid beside her. Crow looked at the line of horses and wagons with the expression of a man reviewing something he expected to see. His eyes moved to Elowen, found her quickly, the way they had at the gate, and then moved away with the dismissive efficiency of a man who has already decided she doesn't change his calculation. He was wrong about that, but she let him be wrong for another few seconds. "Rourke," Crow said, pleasant voice. "The kind of pleasant that doesn't reach the eyes." "You're moving early. I have a contract to fulfill," Silas said. "You do," Crow agreed. "Unfortunately, that contract may be subject to some complications." He reached into his coat and produced a folded document, holding it up in the lantern light with the theatrical precision of a man who has rehearsed this moment. "County paperwork. As of 3 days ago, a portion of Ironwood's property is in dispute. Given the debt instrument attached to that property, I'm afraid I need to ask you to turn those animals around until the matter is resolved. Let me see it, Eloin said. Everyone looked at her, including Crow, whose expression shifted not much, but enough. It's a legal document, Mrs. Vance, he said. I'm not certain you'd. Let me see it, she said again. The silence had weight. She could feel Silas beside her, and she could feel Crow's calculation running, and she understood that the next 10 seconds would determine whether she got to read that document or whether Crow found a reason to refuse her that everyone present would accept. He handed it to the nearest rider, who brought it across. She took it. She read it in the lantern light that Wade held up beside her without being asked. They registered that the fact that he'd moved the lantern without being asked, which told her something about where Wade had landed in the past 12 days. The document was dense. Legal language always was. It was built to be dense, to tire out the person reading it before they reached the part that mattered. She had read enough of Thomas's debt papers to know how to cut through the density and find the load-bearing sentences. She found them. She read them twice. Then she looked at the header. Property description. The date. She went very still. This document, she said, keeping her voice even, references Ironwood Ranch by its address on Caldwell Street. When was Caldwell Street named, she said. Pause, slight, the kind that wouldn't mean anything to most people. I'm not certain. I follow the relevance. This document is dated February 1881, she said. Caldwell Street was named in August 1881. I know this because when I came through Millhaven on the third day, I spent 2 hours at the county assessor's office looking at historical property records, because I like to know what ground I'm standing on. She looked up from the document. This deed uses a street name that didn't exist on the date it was supposedly signed. The silence that followed was a different quality from all the silences before it. The county official, she hadn't seen him until now. He was standing at the edge of the lantern light near the second wagon. A man she recognized from the assessor's office, round-faced, uncomfortable, in the clothes of someone who had been collected from somewhere in a hurry, made a sound that was not quite a word. Crow's face did not change, which was, she had learned from years of watching Thomas try to maintain composure when he'd been caught in one of his financial misdirections, itself a tell. The face that doesn't change when it should is a face that has decided not to show you what just happened inside it. The street name issue can be explained by a clerical error, Crow began. The notary seal, she said. She held the document up slightly. This belongs to a Mr. Arthur Fenwick. I read 3 other documents in the assessor's office that referenced Fenwick as a notary in this county. She paused. I also read his obituary. He died in October of 1879. This document is dated February 1881. She let the pause breathe. A dead man signed this 14 months after he was buried. One of Crow's hired riders shifted in his saddle. It was the smallest possible movement. The movement of a man who has just understood that the thing he came to do tonight has changed shape. That's a serious allegation, Crow said. His voice was still level. But something underneath it had changed the practiced authority of it, had a crack running through it now, hairline thin. But there. It's an observation, Eloin said. The allegation part belongs to a county judge. Crow looked at Silas. He had given up looking at Eloin as a non-factor. She could see that the dismissive efficiency was gone, replaced by something more careful. Rourke, I'm prepared to discuss a resolution, Bram Eloin said. She said it conversationally, as though she'd just noticed him standing there, which she hadn't. She had been aware of exactly where Bram was standing since the moment they'd come around the bend. Bram looked at her. He had the face of a man who has made a decision he is not entirely at peace with. She had seen that face before on Thomas, on the men who had come to collect Thomas's debts, on people who had committed to a position and were discovering that the ground it was standing on was not what they'd been told. How much did he promise you, she said. Bram said nothing. Because I know what Crow wants from Ironwood, she said. I've looked at those maps in the assessor's office, too. I know what's under that land, or rather, what's beside it. The water rights. She looked at Crow briefly, then back at Bram. A man who controls the water rights in this valley, controls who farms and who doesn't, who profits and who sells for nothing because they can't afford to irrigate. That's not a ranch he's after. That's a territory. She paused. And a man who wants a territory doesn't share it. He doesn't share the money, and he doesn't share the credit, and he doesn't share the risk. He puts other people between himself and the risk. She looked at Bram steadily. How much of what he promised you is actually in writing? Bram's jaw tightened. Bram, Silas said quietly. His voice had none of the hardness she'd expected. It was the voice of a man speaking to someone he'd worked with for years and was grieving even now. Don't protect him. He already burned you once. He sent you in without telling you what you were really doing. Whatever he told you this would cost you if it went wrong. It's going to cost you that, plus more, because I will have no choice. But if you tell me what he told you. He said it was paperwork, Bram said abruptly. His voice was rough, pushed out past something. He said it was a debt Rourke owed fair and square, and all he needed was someone inside to slow things down. Keep the horses behind. Make the delivery late. He stopped. Started again. He didn't say anything about horses getting hurt. The grit packed under the shoes, Silas said. Bram shook his head. One short, hard movement. That wasn't me, I left. I was out of it after that. Who did it? Elowen said. Bram looked at Crow. It was not an accusatory look. It was something more complicated, the look of a man who has just understood the full scope of what he'd been made part of. He sent someone else in, Bram said, after you fired me. Someone who knew the gate would be open, Crow said sharply. Bram. He told me it was clean, Bram said. Not to Crow. To Silas. He told me nobody would get hurt. He told me Rourke owed the money, and all I was doing was making sure the books got settled the right way. He told me, his voice broke on the last word, a hairline fracture that he pushed through quickly. He told me a lot of things. The sound that arrived then was hoofbeats, coming from the east, not Crow's riders, who were all present and accounted for, but something additional coming fast down the road they'd just ridden in from. Everyone turned. A single rider. Young, she could tell from the posture even before the lantern light caught him. When it did, she recognized the gap-toothed outline of Denny, who was supposed to be in the loft watching the property, riding a horse at a pace that suggested he had made a decision and committed to it without having fully thought through the reception he was going to receive. He pulled up hard. His horse danced 2 steps before settling. Denny, Silas said, the voice of a man who is genuinely not sure whether to be angry. What? Man came to the ranch, Denny said, breathing hard. 20 minutes after you left. County man, Ellsworth, from the land office. Said he had something. He reached into his coat and produced a folded packet. His hand was shaking, which he appeared not to notice. Said it couldn't wait. Said you needed it tonight. He extended the packet toward Silas. Elowen took it instead, not rudely, but with the smooth directness of someone who has read 2 documents in the past 5 minutes and is apparently the person reading documents tonight. She opened it in the lantern light. She read it once. Read it again. She looked up at the round-faced county official, still standing at the edge of the lamplight. He had been watching her with the expression of a man, watching a situation either get very much better or very much worse, and not yet knowing which. You're from the assessor's office, she said. You were there the day I came in. I was. Then you know what this is, she said. He swallowed again, nodded. She looked at Crow. The original deed to the property Ironwood sits on, she said. The one your document claims to supersede. Recorded in 1874. Before the debt instrument you say Silas signed. Before the annotations you claim give you standing to call the debt. She held both documents up, side by side. Your document says the property was transferred with debt, attached from 1878. This one says the transfer happened free and clear in 1874. She paused. They can't both be right, and only one of them has a notary who was alive when he signed it. Crow looked at her. For the first time tonight, the flat calculation in his eyes had been replaced by something else. Something that was trying to reassemble what had just happened and was finding the pieces didn't fit back together the way they'd started. You've been building this for 2 years, Elowen said. Her voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. Not just Ironwood. I've looked at the records. 4 other ranches in this valley have debt instruments that look like this one. The same notary signatures. The same address notations that use names those streets didn't have yet. The same pattern. She let that settle. Then how many of them settled rather than fight it? Crow said nothing. 3, she said. I could find 3. Other one is still in dispute. She looked at the county official. Is it? The man cleared his throat. He looked at Crow. Then he looked away from Crow, which was the significant movement. The one that told her something had shifted in him. The weight of what he was part of had become heavier than the weight of what he owed the man beside him. There's an ongoing inquiry, he said. His voice had found something firmer than it had started with, into several property transfers in Millhaven County. I was contacted 2 days ago by the circuit judge's office. He paused. I believe the inquiry has expanded. One of Crow's riders backed his horse up. A single step. Nobody said anything about it. He backed up another step. You can't, Crow began. The wagons are moving, Silas said. It was the first time he'd spoken in several minutes, and the quality of his voice had changed. The weight was still there, that was structural. It would take longer than one night to put down, but beneath it, something had straightened. You have no right, Crow said. And this time his voice had changed too. The pleasantness stripped back to reveal what was underneath it, which was the voice of a man who has always gotten what he wanted through calculation, and is discovering that his calculation has a hole in it. I have 10 horses shod and ready, and a buyer waiting and a contract signed in good faith, Silas said. Move your wagons. The hired riders looked at Crow. Not defiantly, just the practical look of men who have been paid for a job and are assessing whether the job is still the job they agreed to. Crow looked back at them. Something passed between them that was not words and did not need to be. The first rider turned his horse. He didn't say anything. He just turned and rode back up the road the way they'd come, at a walk, unhurried, with the air of a man who has other engagements. The second rider followed. The third, the fourth. Crow sat alone on his horse with Bram standing beside him, and the 3 wagons blocking the road, and the county official who was no longer looking at him. Silas looked at the wagon drivers. They were Crow's men. They'd been positioned here by Crow, which meant they had made the same calculation the riders had just made, and arrived at the same conclusion, slightly faster, because they were closer to the documents. One of them was already climbing down from his seat. They moved the wagons in 7 minutes. Nobody spoke while it happened. The silence had a specific quality, not the held breath silence from before, but the silence that follows a thing releasing, the particular quiet of a situation that has been wound tight for a long time and has just in one decisive moment come off the tension. The ironwood line moved through. Elowen rode through at the rear, behind the last of the horses, and as she passed the place where Crow was still sitting on his horse, she looked at him directly. He looked back. There was no satisfaction in it. That surprised her slightly. She had expected to feel something in that moment, some version of the cold vindication she'd been carrying through 12 days of work and sabotage and rumors, and the particular grinding exhaustion of being underestimated by people who thought. Her beauty was the most significant fact about her. But what she felt instead was simpler and less dramatic than vindication. She felt finished. Not done, there was still a delivery to make, and documents to file, and whatever came next after tonight. But finished with this specific battle, the one that had been fought on Crow's terms since the day she walked through Ironwood's gate. The fight was no longer his. He had set the board and chosen the pieces and played his hand, and it had not been enough. She rode through. Bram didn't follow them. He stood in the road as the last of the Ironwood horses passed, and she didn't look back to see what happened after that, because it wasn't her business to look back. She had said what she needed to say to him, and he had said what he needed to say, and whatever he did with what came next was between himself and the decisions he'd made. The delivery took another 2 hours. The buyer's ranch was a lit-up, working operation even in the pre-dawn hours, the kind of place that keeps its own schedule, regardless of whether the rest of the world is awake yet. A man named Colton Marsh met them at the gate with a lantern, and the practical efficiency of someone who had been informed the delivery was coming early and had reorganized his morning accordingly. He inspected each horse. Elowen stood beside the first one and answered his questions with the directness she used for everything the work that had been done, the conditions each animal had been through, the specific notes on Sister's sound sensitivity and Stockton's recent treatment. He listened the way people listen when they're actually listening, not performing attention, but gathering information. When he finished with the 10th horse, he looked at her. "You the farrier," he said. "I am. Good work," he said. No qualification. No surprise built into it. No inflection that suggested the good work was good work given the circumstances. Good work for a woman. Good work, considering. Just 2 words in a flat assessor's tone. She said, "Thank you." He paid Silas on the spot. Counted it out in the lantern light with the methodical precision of a man who has done this 1,000 times and does not make errors. Silas stood with the money in his hand for a moment before he put it away. Elowen watched him. She watched the precise moment when the reality of it reached him, not the number, but what the number meant, what it canceled, what it preserved. The clinic Silas's late wife had dreamed about. The hands who had families, the horses, including a black mare who had been called Black Fury by men who hadn't had the patience to understand her and was called Midnight Mercy now. He folded the money and put it in his coat. He looked at Elowen. She looked back. "Don't say it," she said. "I wasn't going to say thank you again," he said. "Good," she said. "I was going to ask if you wanted coffee," he said. "Marsh will have it. He seems like a man who always has coffee." Marsh did have coffee. It was strong and hot, and they drank it in the pre-dawn dark while the horses settled in their new home, and the crew leaned against fences and did nothing which they had earned. Hector sat beside her on the fence and said, after a long, comfortable silence, "That thing you did with the document. Street name." "Yes," she said. "You figured that out tonight or before." "Before," she said. "How long before?" 2 days, she said. "I went back to the assessor's office. I wanted to be certain." Hector was quiet for a moment. "Silas didn't know you'd gone." "No. Why not?" She thought about it. "Because I wasn't ready to tell him something I wasn't certain of yet," she said. "And because I needed to see the rest of the records on my own before I understood the full size of it." She paused. "Crow hasn't just been doing this to Ironwood. There are other ranches, other forged deeds. Whatever the circuit judge does with this, it's bigger than one delivery." Hector looked at the fence post in front of him. "He's going to face charges." "He should," she said. "Whether he does is for the law to sort out." The light was beginning to change. The absolute darkness of pre-dawn softening into the gray that comes before the actual sunrise, the light that doesn't commit to anything yet, but tells you something is coming. Wade appeared beside them with his own cup of coffee and sat on the fence without being invited and without asking, which was, she was beginning to understand, simply how Wade operated. He was present or he wasn't present, and he didn't make a production of either. "You knew about the crossing," he said. "Yes," she said. "You told Silas to go early because of the crossing." "Yes." He drank his coffee, said nothing more. Something about the way he'd asked the questions, not accusatory, not impressed exactly. Just the tone of a man correcting his own previous assessment, told her that whatever Wade had thought of her on the first day, it was different from what he thought of her now, and he didn't feel the need to say so at length. And she respected that more than she would have respected the saying. The sun came up over the ridge while they were still sitting there. Elowen watched it. The light came in low and golden across the grass, the particular color of early morning, in a place where things are about to change, and she thought about the abandoned clinic that Silas's late wife had wanted to turn into something useful. And she thought about Clara Muth saying, "You watch your back," because they're not done. And she thought about the folded paper in her coat pocket with the address on it. She was not done either. But this specific 12-day part was finished. She had come to Ironwood with a flour sack and a hammer and everything she owned, and she had done the work she said she would do, and she had done it under conditions that had been built to prevent it. And 10 horses were standing in a new pasture having passed inspection. And a forged document was in the county official's hands and would be on a judge's desk before the week was out. She set down her coffee cup on the fence post. She was tired in the particular way that comes after something that has required everything, not just the physical work, though there had been plenty of that, but the sustained vigilance, the management of anger, the daily decision not to be defeated by people who had more resources than she did, but less of whatever it was she had. She didn't have a name for it. She didn't need one. Silas came and stood beside the fence without sitting. He looked at the sunrise the way he looked at most things directly, without performance. Then he looked at her. "When we get back," he said, "I want to talk to you about something." "The clinic," she said. He blinked, the closest thing to surprise she'd seen from him. "You knew. I read the property records," she said. "When I was at the assessor's office, I saw the abandoned building on the east end of town. I saw whose name it was recorded under. I did the arithmetic." She paused. "I'd like to know what you plan to do with it." He was quiet for a moment. "I was going to ask you the same question," he said. She looked at the sunrise. The light had moved up from gold to something clearer, the kind of morning light that makes everything look like it's been washed clean, even when it hasn't. "Let's talk on the ride back," she said. She climbed down from the fence. The ride back from Marsh's ranch took longer than the ride out. Not because of the distance was the same, but because they were riding in daylight now, And daylight, after a sleepless night, does something particular to the body, makes the miles feel longer, and the silence between people feel wider. And nobody in the Ironwood crew had more than 2 hours of sleep behind them. Cord and Emmett rode at the back with the particular glazed steadiness of men running on will and cold morning air. Hector's posture had the slight forward lean of someone fighting to stay upright. Even Wade, who appeared to be made of material more durable than ordinary men, had a quality about him this morning that suggested he was counting the miles. Elowen and Silas rode together at the front, which had stopped being a deliberate arrangement sometime around the 6th day and had simply become where they ended up. The thing about the clinic, she had said on the ride out. Let's talk about it on the ride back. He let her start it. Your wife's name was on the deed, she said. Margaret. Margaret, he said. She went by Meg. How long did she have the building? 4 years. Never got it past the planning stage. He looked at the road ahead. She knew what she wanted to do with it. A place for women who came through with nowhere to go. Travelers, workers, women running from bad situations. He paused. She had a list, written out in a ledger. Every service she wanted to offer. Every resource she wanted to connect people to. He paused again. She got sick before she could start. How long ago? 3 years. Elowen nodded. She did not say I'm sorry again, because she had already said it earlier, in the way you say it when you mean it rather than when you're filling silence. She thought about Meg Rourke's ledger, a woman she had never met, writing down everything she intended to build, dying before she could build it. What condition is the building in, she said. Roof needs work. Floor on the east side is soft. Windows are intact. Structure is sound according to the man I had looked at it last spring. He paused. I had it looked at because I kept thinking about doing something with it. Kept not doing it. Why not? He was quiet for long enough that she looked at him. His jaw was working through something. Because starting it would mean she's not going to start it, he said. And not starting it means I can keep pretending she might. He said it flatly, without dramatics. The way people say true things they've known for a while and haven't said out loud yet. I know how that sounds. It sounds like grief, she said. It sounds exactly like that. He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted the particular shift of a person who has been braced for a response and received a different one than they expected. I want to buy the building, she said. Not take it, not have it given to me. Buy it at whatever fair value the county records show. Monthly payments out of my wages until it's paid off. She held up a hand before he could speak. And before you tell me that's not necessary, I know it's not necessary. I'm telling you it's what I need it to be. Silas looked at the road. Why? Because the only thing I've had that was fully mine in the past 4 years was my work, she said. Thomas was good to me in the ways he knew how to be. But the money was always his money, and the decisions were always his decisions, and the debts were... She stopped. The debts were his too, except I was the one who paid them. If I take that building as a gift, it's someone else's charity. If I earn it, it's mine, and what I build in it is mine. She paused. And Meg Rourke's, both of those things can be true at once. Silas rode without speaking for a stretch. The road had widened out of the canyon, and the morning light was full now, striking the dust ahead of them gold and white. In the distance, the roofline of Millhaven was just visible. Fair value is $80, he said, according to the county. Then I'll pay $80, she said. That'll take you. I can figure out how long it'll take me, she said. I know what I earn. He looked sideways at her. The almost smile came and went. All right, he said. They rode the rest of the way back in a silence that was easy rather than empty, the kind that exists between people who have said what needed saying and don't feel the need to pad it out. They came into Millhaven at 8:30 in the morning. The timing was not planned, but it was, Elowen would think later, exactly right, late enough for the town to be fully awake, early enough for the news about the previous night to still be fresh. Because the news had moved. She could tell from the moment they rode onto the main street that it had moved, could read it in the way. People stopped what they were doing, a woman outside the laundry, 2 men in front of the feed store, a boy who had been sweeping the step of the bank and was now not sweeping it. The particular stillness of people who have heard a thing and are now seeing the people involved in the thing walk past in daylight. She rode straight. She had been riding straight for 12 days, and she rode straight now, not performing anything, not constructing her posture for the people on the sidewalk. She was tired in her spine and her shoulders, and the particular muscle behind her left knee that always complained first. And she was not attempting to conceal any of that. She was simply riding through town the way she always rode, with the level-headed quality that was not arrogance and was not apology, and was simply how she moved through the world when she wasn't wasting energy on performing something for someone else's benefit. Parrish was outside the dry goods store. Elowen saw her before Mrs. Parrish saw her, because Mrs. Parrish was talking to a woman whose back was to the street. When Mrs. Parrish's eyes found the riders coming down the main road, her conversation stopped mid-word. The woman she'd been talking to turned around. Elowen did not slow her horse. She did not speed it up. She met Mrs. Parrish's eyes as she rode past and held them for 2 seconds, and then looked back at the road ahead. 2 seconds. Enough. What happened next, she did not see because she did not turn to look. She found out later from Denny, who found out from a woman who had been at the laundry and had watched the whole thing from across the street. Mrs. Parrish, apparently, stood on the sidewalk for a full minute after the Ironwood crew rode past. Then she went inside. Then she came back out and crossed the street to the hardware store, where Sherman Glatt was opening his shutters, and said something to him that Glatt's wife, who was also there, described later as the most words Mrs. Parrish had said in a single breath in living memory. What she said, reconstructed from several accounts, was essentially this: that she had repeated things she shouldn't have repeated, about a woman she didn't know, based on information from a source she hadn't thought to question, and that she was aware that didn't fix anything. But she intended to say so to anyone who would listen, starting with Sherman Glatt and working outward from there. Elowen didn't know about any of this until the afternoon. What she knew in the morning was that they rode back to Ironwood and the gates were intact, and Denny was alive and slightly sulky about having missed everything. And Midnight Mercy was at the fence of the far corral before the horses had even been unsaddled, tracking Elowen's movement across the yard with her head up and her ears forward and her whole body oriented in a single direction. Elowen walked to the corral before she did anything else. She put her hand over the fence rail. The mare pressed her face into it with a force that was not gentle and communicated no interest in being gentle. The full-weight greeting of an animal that is extremely large and does not particularly care at this moment about the structural limitations of fences or human hands. "I know," Elowen said. "I was gone all night. I know." The mare pushed harder. "I'm back," Elowen said. "I told you I'd be back." She stood at the fence for 5 minutes doing nothing except being present, which was the thing the mare had needed from the beginning, and which Elowen found, if she was honest with herself, that she also needed sometimes to be somewhere that did not require explanation or performance, where the only credential was showing up. She went inside and slept for 4 hours. She woke to voices in the yard. Not raised just the quality of a conversation that had more people in it than the usual lunchtime talk. She got up and looked out the east window. 3 men she didn't recognize, dressed in the practical but slightly formal way of county officials or lawyers, not the ornate formality of men performing their importance, but the worn-in formality of men who spend a lot of time in offices and courtrooms and have stopped thinking about what they're wearing. She washed her face, pinned her hair, and went out. Silas was in the yard with the 3 men. He saw her come out of the bunkhouse, and something in his posture changed, not relief, but a settling. The way posture settles when the person you've been doing a thing alongside shows up. "This is Elowen Vance," he said to the men, Ironwood's farrier. "She's the one who identified the document irregularity last night." The man in the center 50s, gray-haired, with the steady eyes of someone who has heard a great many things in a great many rooms and stopped being surprised, by most of them looked at Elowen with the particular attention of a person re-evaluating. "Mr. Rourke tells me you noticed the street name discrepancy on Crow's deed." "I did," she said, "and that you'd done research at the county assessor's office beforehand." "Twice," she said. "The first time on my 3rd day in Millhaven. The second time on the 11th day, after I understood the scope of what Crow was doing." "What did you find on the second visit?" 4 other property transfers with the same pattern," she said. "Notary seals from Arthur Fenwick, who died in October 1879. Dates ranging from 1880 to 1882. In each case, the deed used address information or property boundary descriptions that referenced county improvements or street names that post-dated the supposed signing." She paused. 3 of those ranches settled. Their owners took payments that were below fair value because they believed the debt instruments were legitimate. The man looked at her steadily. You documented this. I wrote down what I found, she said. Notes, not formal documentation. I can show you what I have. I'd like to see it, he said. His name was Alderman Cross. And he was, Silas told her afterward, a circuit investigator attached to the district judge's office, not a lawyer, not a law enforcement officer in the ordinary sense, but the person sent ahead of legal proceedings to establish whether legal proceedings were warranted. He had arrived in Millhaven 2 days ago, before the canyon confrontation, following a complaint filed by one of the ranchers who had settled and subsequently decided the settlement had felt wrong enough to report. He spent 2 hours with Elowen's notes at the table in the main office. He asked questions, she answered them. He asked follow-up questions, she answered those too. At one point he put down his pen and said simply, "You read property records the way lawyers read property records." "I read them the way someone reads them when they need to be certain," she said. "My husband left debts. I read every document involved in settling those debts." "You get fast at it." He looked at her for a moment. "I'm sorry about your husband." "Thank you," she said. And then, because it felt relevant, "The debts are settled." "I'm not." He almost smiled. He had the controlled face of someone who has practiced not reacting, but she caught the edge of it. He went back to the notes. When he was done, he said to Silas, "The circuit judge will be in Millhaven by end of week. I expect formal charges against Crow and at minimum 2 associates before the month is out." He paused. "The 3 settled ranches, their owners may have grounds to recover the difference between what they accepted and fair value. That will take longer, but it's not impossible." Silas sat with that for a moment. "The Hendersons," he said quietly, "the Hartley family. If they have documentation of the original settlements." "Yes." Silas looked at Elowen. She looked back. She was thinking about the same thing he was thinking about, the invisible size of what Crow had been doing, the ranches she'd seen in the records, families whose land had been taken or squeezed or pressured down to prices that were robbery dressed in legal language. "Is there anything else you need from us?" Silas said. "Your formal statement about last night," Cross said, "and Mrs. Vance's account of what she found at the assessor's office written out properly." He paused. "I'll also need a statement from the county official who was present at the canyon crossing." "Mr. Aldgate. He was not there voluntarily," Elowen said. Cross looked at her. "He was brought there by Crow," she said. "I don't know the details of how, whether he was threatened or persuaded or simply told what he was attending. But he provided us access to information when it mattered." He could have said nothing. Cross studied her. "You're making a case for leniency." "I'm providing context," she said. "What you do with it is your business." He wrote something down. Then he closed his notebook and stood up. "I'll be in contact," he said. He and his 2 associates left the ranch. The yard was quiet after they left. Silas stood in the doorway of the main office, looking at the road they'd taken out. Elowen stood beside him. "It's going to take time," he said. "These things always do," she said. "Crow's not in custody. He'll be making arrangements." "He will," she said. "But he'll be making them from a position that's significantly smaller than the one he was in yesterday." She paused. "A man who operates through manipulation and legal architecture, take the architecture away, and what he has left is a lot less than he's used to working with." Silas nodded slowly. Then he said, "The Hendersons are 60 miles north. Jim Henderson is 68 years old, and his wife is not well. They took what Crow offered, because fighting it would have meant a legal battle they couldn't afford." He stopped. "I've been thinking about that since Cross said it." "So have I," she said. They stood in the doorway for a moment. "Write them a letter," she said. "Tell them what's happened. Tell them Cross's name and the circuit judge's name. Give them enough that they know where to go." She paused. "You can't fix everything Crow did in 1 week, but you can make sure the Hendersons know there's a road back." He looked at her sideways. "You want to help me write it?" "Tonight," she said. "After supper." He nodded. The afternoon was the first genuinely unhurried afternoon she'd had since arriving at Ironwood, and her body didn't quite know what to do with the absence of urgency. She found herself going through the horses out of habit rather than necessity, doing the checks she'd been doing daily for 12 days, because the habit was built now and her hands needed something to do. The horses were fine. They were more than fine. They had been well treated by a person who understood them, and their condition showed it. She was checking Sister's feet, not because they needed checking, but because Sister had shown, over the past week, a tentative willingness to stand for the contact that Elowen wanted to encourage when Clara Muth appeared at the barn door. Elowen looked up. Clara looked the same as she had on the road, direct, plain-faced, with the settled manner of someone who has stopped accommodating people who don't deserve it. She came into the barn without asking permission and stopped at the stall door and looked at Elowen and said, "I heard what happened." "Which part?" Elowen said. "Most of it," Clara said. "Word travels." She paused. "I also heard you name the Black Mare." "Midnight Mercy," Elowen said. Clara's expression shifted slightly, not softened exactly, but opened. "Good name," she said. "That's a name that means something." "It does," Elowen agreed. Clara leaned against the stall door. "The Women's Committee wanted me to come," she said. "To say we heard, and we're glad it went right. And to ask," she paused, choosing her words with the care of someone who has learned that the way you ask something shapes the answer. "There's a building on the east end of town. Been empty 3 years. Word is you might be interested in it." Elowen looked at her steadily. "Word travels fast. Silas Rourke mentioned it to Walt Glatt this morning," Clara said. "Walt mentioned it to his wife. His wife mentioned it to 3 people in the committee." She paused. "Small town. I'm interested in the building," Elowen said. "I'm buying it monthly payments." Clara nodded once, the nod of someone confirming what she already suspected. "What are you planning to do with it?" "What Meg Rourke planned to do with it," Elowen said. "A place for women and families who come through with nowhere to go. Practical support, safe shelter, connection to whatever resources the county has." She paused. "I'd want to do it properly, with people who know this community and what it actually needs, not what I think it needs based on 12 days of being here." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Meg had a ledger," she said. Elowen went still. "I know," she said. "Silas mentioned it." "I have it," Clara said. "She gave it to me for safekeeping when she got sick. Said she didn't want it lost when she stopped." Cleared her throat, which was the only concession to emotion she appeared willing to make. She said she didn't want it lost. She said someone would come along eventually, who would know what to do with it. The silence in the barn had a weight that wasn't uncomfortable. "I'd like to see it," Elowen said. "I know you would," Clara said. She reached into her coat and produced a small leather ledger, worn at the spine, the cover cracked in one corner. She held it out through the stall door. Elowen took it. She didn't open it immediately. She held it for a moment, with the same care she'd hold a horse's hoof, aware of the weight of it, the particular quality of something that has been carried for a long time by someone who understood its value. Then she opened it. The handwriting was clear and deliberate, the handwriting of someone who had thought carefully about what they were putting down. The first page was a header, "Resources for Women in Millhaven County and Surrounding Areas," and beneath it, a date 1879, and beneath that, in smaller letters, a work in progress. She read the first page, then the second, then she closed it and held it. She was thorough, she said. Meg was always thorough, Clara said. Used to drive Silas half out of his mind. She'd plan a thing 6 ways before she started it, and then halfway through she'd find a 7th way, and she'd stop and plan that one too. Something that was almost a smile. He loved that about her. Don't let him tell you he didn't. Elowen looked at the ledger in her hands. "Can I keep this?" she said. "Until the building is mine and we can start doing something with it." "Meg gave it to me to give to someone who would use it," Clara said. "It's you." "Yes." She left the barn the same way she'd come in, without ceremony, at her own pace, with the self-possessed stride of a woman who has never needed an audience for anything she's done. Elowen put the ledger in her coat pocket alongside the folded paper with the address. Coat was getting heavy. The following 3 days had a different quality from the 12 that had preceded them. Not easy, because nothing at Ironwood had been easy, and probably wouldn't be, but forward-moving in a way that felt earned rather than fought for. Alderman Cross's formal process was underway. Crow had retained a lawyer, which everyone expected, and had made several attempts in the first day to contest the county assessor's records, which everyone also expected, and had run into the particular wall of a judicial process that had, for once, gotten ahead of him rather than behind. The circuit judge arrived on the 4th day. His name was Everett Pryor, and he was 61 years old and had the reputation, according to Clara, of being incapable of being impressed by money and only marginally capable of being impressed by anything else, which was, Clara said, exactly the kind of man you wanted reading forged deeds. Elowen gave her formal statement to Cross in the presence of Judge Pryor's clerk. She sat at the table in the county building and said what she had seen and what she had found and what she had concluded and why clearly, without embellishment. And when they asked her questions, she answered them. And when they asked follow-up questions, she answered those too. At one point, the clerk asked how she had known to look at the street name specifically, and she said she had read the document the way she read any document. She needed to rely on all of it, not just the parts that were meant to be read. And the clerk wrote this down without comment, though she noticed he underlined it. Crow attended a hearing 2 days later. She was not present for it. It was not her proceeding, and she had not been asked to attend, and she had work at Ironwood that she had fallen behind on during the canyon delivery. She heard about it from Silas, who heard about it from Cross, who provided a summary that was legally careful and emotionally flat, formal charges filed, bail set at a figure that Crow could meet. But that was large enough to mean something. Restrictions on property transactions while the investigation was active. The 3 settled ranches, Silas said. Cross confirmed it. Their settlements are being reviewed. Elowen nodded. She was working on a hoof at the time one of the non-contract horses that had been waiting patiently for attention while the past 2 weeks consumed everything, and she kept working while Silas talked. He had learned, over the weeks, that this was how she operated, that she could listen and work simultaneously, and that stopping the work to demonstrate that she was listening was, for her, a performance she found unnecessary. The Hendersons got the letter, he added. Jim Henderson sent a reply through the mail rider this morning. He paused. The mail rider mentioned it. Elowen kept working. Her jaw was tight, he said. Silas continued, reading from the reply, that he knew something had been wrong, but he didn't have the money to prove it, and he'd been carrying that for 2 years. He folded the letter. 2 years of knowing and not being able to do anything about it. He can do something now, she said. He can, Silas agreed. She set the hoof down and straightened. Her back made its opinion known. She rolled her shoulders and worked through the familiar complaint of muscles that had been doing the same thing in the same position for years, and had no plans to stop but also reserved the right to object. The clinic building, she said. When can I start going through it? I spoke to the county registrar this morning, he said. The transfer is processing. 2 weeks, maybe 3. He paused. You can look at it now if you want. I'll take you there. She looked at the horse she'd been working on. She looked at the 2 remaining in the next stalls. She looked at Silas. Tomorrow morning, she said. Early. He nodded. That evening, after supper, she sat in the main office with Silas and wrote 2 more letters, one to the Hartley family, whose name had appeared in Cross's inquiry as the 4th settled ranch, and one to a woman named Ruth Ennis, whose name Clara had mentioned as a county resource for displaced women and families. A woman who apparently knew things about what was actually available and what was actually useful in a way that the official lists did not always reflect. She wrote the Hartley letter herself, with Silas providing details. She read it back to him when she was done. That's right, he said. That's exactly right. I'm not a lawyer, she said. Say that in the letter. You already did, he said. 3rd paragraph. She looked at the letter. 3rd paragraph. I am not a lawyer, and this should not be taken as legal advice, but only as information about a process that is underway. Good, she said. She folded the letter. They sat for a moment in the quiet of the office. The fire had burned down to coals. The window showed darkness and the distant shape of the cottonwood at the south fence. Silas, she said. He looked at her. You hired me when 11 other people had been driven away, she said. And then you believed me about Bram when you didn't have proof. And you let me read the document at the canyon crossing when you could have handled it yourself. She paused. I want you to know I don't take any of that for granted. He looked at the coals for a moment. You made it easy to trust you, he said. I didn't, she said. I showed up with a hammer and nothing else. You couldn't have known. I knew, he said. You didn't know. You made a judgment. Same thing, he said. She looked at him. He looked back. The fire put low light across both their faces, and the room had the particular quality of late evenings in enclosed spaces, a contained warmth, the outside world reduced to a dark shape beyond glass. You're going to tell me I'm too practical, she said. I was going to say you're too hard on the idea of trust, he said. Knowing someone is trustworthy and being certain of it aren't the same thing. You make a judgment and you live with what it costs if you're wrong. He paused. You've been burned on that. So have I. Doesn't mean the judgment is wrong. She thought about Thomas. Not the debts, not tonight, not the arithmetic of what he'd cost her. The other things. The way he'd looked at her the first time she'd gentled a frightened horse. The way he'd said, without meaning it as a compliment because he hadn't understood, it was one, you see things other people don't see. The 11 years of working beside him, which had not been wasted even when they had been hard. No, she said, it doesn't mean the judgment is wrong. She picked up the folded letters. Early tomorrow, she said. Early, he agreed. She went to the bunkhouse. The photograph was face up on the shelf where she'd left it, and she looked at it for a moment before she turned the lamp down at the off-angle smile. The permanent stillness of it. The man she had loved in the ways she had been able to love him, and grieved in the ways she was still working through. I'm going to see the building tomorrow, she said to the photograph. It said nothing. It never did, but saying it felt like something. Like moving a stone from one pocket to the other, same weight, different position, and that matters more than it sounds. She turned down the lamp. The morning came early, as it always did in that east-facing room, the light arriving before she was ready for it, and insisting anyway, which she had come to appreciate even when she was too tired to appreciate it. She dressed, pinned her hair, pulled on her coat, and found Silas already in the yard, with 2 horses saddled and a look on his face that she was beginning to recognize, the look of a man who has done a thing and is waiting to see how it lands. They rode into town. The clinic building was on the east end of Millhaven's main street, set back from the road by a narrow yard that had gone to weeds, with a wide front porch that had lost 2 of its port posts and was leaning toward the yard at an angle that was not structural but was noticeable. The windows were intact, as Silas had said. The sign that had once hung above the door was gone. The hooks were still there, rusting, empty. The building itself was wood-framed, larger than it appeared from the street, with a side addition that extended the footprint considerably. She stood in front of it. She had stood in front of Ironwood's gate, holding a hammer and everything she owned, and felt the particular quality of a threshold the moment before you go through, when it's still possible not to, when you can still choose the version of events where you turned around. She had not turned around. She stood in front of the clinic building and felt something similar, but different in its texture. Not the threshold of survival. Something else. Meg wanted to call it Mercy House, Silas said beside her. His voice was quiet, flat in the way voices go when they're working to stay that way. It's in the ledger. First page. She looked at the building. Then it should be called that, she said. She walked up the porch steps. Third one creaked badly, and she made a mental note of it. She tried the door, and it opened stiff, warped slightly in the frame, requiring more push than a well-maintained door should, but it opened. She walked in. The inside smelled of dust and old wood and time. The main room was larger than she'd expected, with high windows on the north wall that let in the morning light in long horizontal bars. The floor was solid on the west side and soft on the east. As Silas had said, she tested it carefully, feeling for the places where it would need reinforcing before anything could be put on it. The walls were intact. The ceiling had a watermark in one corner that told her the roof had leaked at some point, though Silas says it had been repaired. She walked through every room. There were 4. The main room, which was the largest. A smaller room on the north side that had been used for storage. A room on the south side that had a fireplace and better light, and which she thought, as she stood in it, would be the right room for a woman who had just arrived and needed to be somewhere that felt private enough to breathe in. And the side addition long, narrow, with windows on both walls and a smell of pine that was fresher than the rest of the building, suggesting it had been added later. She stood in the addition for a long moment. Then she went back to the main room where Silas was waiting. I'll need a carpenter, she said, for the floor and the porch, and someone who knows roofing, to assess the repair that was done. I know people, he said. I know you do, she said. I'd like to meet them myself and agree the work before it starts. I expected nothing less, he said. She looked around the main room one more time. The long bars of morning light lay across the dusty floor. The east windows needed cleaning. The soft spot in the east floor would need to come up and be rebuilt before anything else. The porch posts would need replacing before the winter. It was a lot of work. She thought about Meg Rourke's ledger in her coat pocket, all those careful pages of planning for a thing Meg hadn't been given the time to build. She thought about the frightened young Travis Yount, who had opened a gate for a man who threatened his mother's home, and who was still at Ironwood because Silas had understood the difference between a bad actor and a scared kid, which was the same understanding Elowen had tried to extend to Bram in the canyon, and which was, she thought, the thing most worth practicing in a world that was more interested in punishment than in understanding what made people do what they did. She thought about midnight mercy, standing rigid and compressed at the far end of the corral on her first day, fighting before she could trust because she had been hurt long enough that fighting was all she had. She thought about what it had taken to change that. Just presence, patience, the willingness to wait without requiring anything. "All right," she said. "All right, what?" Silas said. "All right, I'll meet your carpenter," she said. "And when the building is ready, I'll need help getting the word out. That there's a place here, that it's real and it's safe and it doesn't cost anything to walk through the door. Clara will handle that," he said. "You don't even need to ask her." "I know," Elowen said, "but I'll ask her anyway." She walked back to the door, pushed it open, still stiff, still warped. That too would need attending to. Because a door that a frightened woman had to fight her way through was not the right door for the place she intended to build. She made a note of it. The carpenter's name was Otto Brell, and he was 63 years old, and had the hands of a man who had been building things since before Elowen was born, and intended to keep building them until something stopped him, which he did not appear to consider likely in the near future. He walked through the clinic building on a Tuesday morning with Elowen behind him, saying almost nothing, which she had learned by the end of the first 10 minutes was not indifference but concentration. He tested the soft floor with his boot heel. He ran his hand along the porch beam. He looked at the watermark on the ceiling for a long time with his head tilted to one side. He crouched in the corner of the addition and looked at the junction of the wall and the foundation with the focused attention of a man reading a language other people couldn't see. Then he stood up and said, 3 weeks, maybe 4 if the floor joists under the east side are worse than they look from above." "How much?" she said. He told her. It was not a small number, but it was an honest one. She could tell the difference because she had spent 11 years working alongside men who quoted prices and men who quoted honest prices. And the gap between them has its own texture if you're paying attention. She had come with a figure in her head, a number she had worked out over several evenings of careful arithmetic, and Otto's number was inside it. "All right," she said. "When can you start Friday?" he said. "Got one job to finish first, Friday," she agreed. He left. She stood in the main room alone for a few minutes, looking at the long bars of light coming through the north windows, and she thought about the things that needed doing and the order they needed doing in. Because order mattered, you couldn't fix the floor until you knew the joists, couldn't hang the door right until the porch was stable, couldn't tell women the place was ready until it actually was. She had a list in the ledger she'd been adding to since Clara handed it to her. Meg Rourke's original entries on the right-hand pages, and her own additions on the left. Conversation between 2 women who had never met, conducted in ink and careful handwriting across 3 years of absence. She found something clarifying in that. She wasn't building this alone, and she never had been, even before she understood that. Otto started on Friday. By the end of the first week, the porch was stable. The door had been rehung, and now swung open with the easy weight of something that had been fitted properly. And the east floor had been opened up to reveal joists that were, as Otto had suspected, worse than they looked from above. He added 2 days to his estimate and told her without apology, which she respected. She adjusted her arithmetic and said, "All right." She was still working at Ironwood through all of it. The horses didn't stop needing shoes because she was building something 3 miles away, and the ranch didn't stop needing a farrier because she had a second project consuming her evenings and her weekends. She worked Ironwood's horses in the mornings and spent her afternoons at the clinic building, which meant she was working longer days than she'd worked during the 12-day contract period. But the quality of the exhaustion was different. That had been the exhaustion of fighting. This was something else. Denny helped on Saturdays without being asked. He showed up the first Saturday with no explanation, picked up a broom, and started sweeping the decades of accumulated dust out of the storage room on the north side. She looked at him across the room, and he shrugged with the elaborate casualness of a 19-year-old, pretending a thing isn't meaningful to him. "Nothing else going on," he said. "Right," she said. He swept for 4 hours and came back the following Saturday. Hector came twice to help with the heavy work, moving the damaged floorboards, carrying the new timber Otto needed shifted. Wade came once, unannounced, with a length of rope, and the information that the window on the south side needed its frame resecured before winter, and proceeded to resecure it without further conversation, and left when he was done. She didn't ask any of them to come. They came because they had watched something happen over the course of 6 weeks, and had decided, each in their own way and for their own reasons, that they wanted to be part of what came next. She thought about that. Sometimes the way people move toward things that feel real, even when real, also means unfinished and complicated and likely to require more from them than they originally planned. The legal proceedings against Lucian Crow moved with the particular pace of county justice, which is to say, not fast, but forward. Alderman Cross had been thorough. Judge Pryor, as Clara had promised, was not impressible by money, and had looked at the stack of forged deeds with the expression of a man who had seen fraud before and found it tedious rather than surprising, which was somehow more devastating to Crow's position than outrage would have been. Crow's lawyer filed motions. The motions were addressed. More motions were filed. This was the architecture of a man trying to slow a process he could no longer stop, which is different from the architecture of innocence, and Judge Pryor appeared to understand the difference clearly. The Bank Millhaven Savings and Trust, in which Crow held a controlling stake, was placed under review by the District Financial Authority. Its loan practices were examined. 3 of its officers were called to provide statements. The loan on Travis Yount's mother's property was found to have been issued under terms that the review board described, in careful legal language, as irregular, which meant coercive, which meant it was canceled and reissued at the standard rate. And Travis Yount's mother received a letter to that effect that she apparently read 4 times before she believed it. Travis told Elowen this himself, standing in the ironwood yard on a morning in early June with the particular look of a young man who has been carrying something heavy and has just been allowed to put it down. He was 20 years old, and he had opened a gate he shouldn't have opened, and he had come to Silas the morning after, and cried through the confession, and Silas had kept him on, not because he didn't understand what Bram had done, but because he did. And because the difference between a person who makes a bad choice under duress and a person who makes a bad choice out of greed is the kind of difference that matters if you believe in anything at all about what people are capable of. She's keeping the house, Travis said, about his mother. He said it like a man who had just learned what relief actually feels like, as distinct from the absence of anxiety he'd been calling relief for the past several months. Good, Elowen said. I know I put you in a bad position, he said. The horses getting into the barn. You put yourself in a bad position, she said. Someone else put you there first. Those aren't the same thing, and you know the difference. Or you would have kept your mouth shut. She paused. You didn't keep your mouth shut. He looked at her. Something settled in his face that had been unsettled for a while. No, he said. I didn't. Then we're finished with it, she said. Bram Kessler had given a full statement to Cross's office. She didn't know the details, it wasn't her statement to know, but she knew the outline, that he had been approached by Crow 18 months before, that he had been told what he'd told Silas in the canyon, that he had believed the story about legitimate debt longer than he should have, because it was easier to believe than the alternative, and that the moment he understood the horses had been hurt, he had stopped cooperating and was already in the process of reconsidering when Elowen had looked at him across a canyon road in the dark and asked him how much of. What Crow had promised him was actually in writing. Nothing, as it turned out. None of it was in writing. Because men like Crow understood that putting things in writing is for the people who need protection, and he had never believed he needed it. Bram left Millhaven County. She heard this from Hector, who heard it from someone at the feed store, the usual route by which information traveled in small towns. She did not know where he went, and did not particularly want to know. He was not a villain. He was a man who had made choices under pressure, and had made some of them wrong, and had tried at the last moment to make one right. What he did with that afterward was his own arithmetic to work through. The clinic building was ready on a Thursday in the 3rd week of June. Otto told her on Wednesday evening, with the understatement of a man who has completed exactly what he said he would complete, and considers the work its own sufficient statement. Floor's done, he said. Porch'll hold anything short of a horse on it. Door hangs right. He paused, painted the addition. Used what was in the shed. It's not perfect. The color's a little off from the main room, but it's clean. Thank you, Otto, she said. He waved this off in the way of a man for whom gratitude is slightly embarrassing. Then he said carefully, "My wife lost her first husband 40 years ago. She had nowhere to go for 3 months." He paused. She had to make do with what was available, which wasn't much. He looked at the building. "This is a good thing you're doing." She looked at him. "I know," she said. He left. She stood in front of Mercy House in the evening light and looked at the porch that no longer leaned, the door that swung right, the windows that had been cleaned until the last of the grime was gone, and the light came through them clear and unfiltered. The yard still needed work. She had plans for that, too. A kitchen garden on the south side, a bench on the porch where people could sit before they decided whether to come in. But the building itself was done. It was solid. It was clean. The door opened easily for anyone who pushed it. She went inside and walked through all 4 rooms one more time. In the south room with the fireplace and the better light, she had put a table and 2 chairs, which Silas had brought from storage at Ironwood, and on the table she had placed Meg Rourke's ledger, open to the first page. She looked at it for a moment, the careful handwriting, the date, the words a work in progress, and she felt the particular weight of continuing something that someone else had started and never finished, which is different from starting your own thing. It asks something different of you. It asks you to hold someone else's intention alongside your own and let both of them be present at once. She thought she could do that. She thought, in fact, that she had been doing it for a while now without having a name for it. The opening of Mercy House was not a ceremony. She had resisted the idea of a ceremony. Clara had gently suggested one, and she had said, with the directness that Clara appeared to respect, rather than take offense at, that a ceremony was for people who wanted to mark a beginning for an audience, and she was more interested in marking it for the people who would actually need what was inside the building. Clara had thought about this and said, "Fair enough," and the subject had been dropped. What happened instead was this. On the Thursday morning, when the building was ready, she opened the door at 7 o'clock, and by 9 o'clock word had reached the street that it was open, and by 10 Clara had come by to look at the rooms and pronounce them suitable, which, from Clara, was the equivalent of a considerable speech of praise. By noon, 3 women from the committee had stopped in, not for themselves, but because they wanted to see it and wanted to know how to send people there when the time came. She walked them through, answered their questions, showed them the ledger, and told them what she could offer and what she couldn't and what she expected to be able to offer eventually. By mid-afternoon, she was back at Ironwood working on a horse. The first person who came to Mercy House for herself arrived 4 days later. Elowen was not there. When it happened, she was at the ranch, and she got the information from Clara, who had been in town and had seen the woman sitting on the porch bench. The woman was young, Clara said, mid-20s, with a child on her hip and a bag over her shoulder, and the expression of someone who has been making decisions alone for long enough that making one more feels almost past her capacity. She had sat on the bench for 20 minutes before she knocked. Elowen listened to this without interrupting. What did she need, she said. Place to sleep, Clara said, and someone who didn't ask too many questions at once. Did she get that? Ruth Ennis was there, Clara said. Ruth Ennis, who knew the county resources the way a good map knows terrain, not just the official routes, but the shortcuts and the dead ends, and the places that looked like something and weren't. Ruth's good with people like that, people who need to come to the decision themselves rather than be moved to it. Elowen nodded. She's there tonight, Clara said. The south room. She and the child. Elowen thought about the south room. Fireplace, the better light, the 2 chairs, the window that now opened smoothly because Otto had fixed the casement. She had chosen that room specifically for what Clara had just described, for the quality of space it offered to someone who needed to breathe before they decided anything. She went to Mercy House after supper. She did not go to the south room. She went to the kitchen, which was a modest and functional space at the back of the main room, and she made tea the way she made everything quietly, without fuss. Then she sat in the main room and waited to see if anyone came out, and if they didn't, that was fine too. Presence didn't always mean interaction. Sometimes it just meant being somewhere in case. After about 20 minutes, the door to the south room opened. The woman was, as Clara had said, younger than Elowen had quite expected, with the face of someone who has been exhausted for long enough that exhaustion has become a kind of baseline. Unremarkable, just the condition of being alive right now. The child was asleep against her shoulder, heavy and boneless in the way of small children who have given up to sleep completely. The woman looked at Elowen with the cautious look of someone who has learned to read a room quickly, because the cost of reading it wrong has been high. Elowen looked back at her with nothing in her face that required a response. "Tea," Elowen said, indicating the pot on the table. The woman came in and sat down. She didn't say anything. She poured the tea with one hand, managing the child on her shoulder with the practiced efficiency of a person who has been doing two things with two hands for long enough that she's forgotten it used to require three. They sat in silence for a few minutes. "You're the one who did this," the woman said finally. Not accusatory, just establishing fact. "The building's mine," Elowen said. "But it's not mine the way people think that word means. It's more like I'm the one holding the door open." The woman looked at her. "I came through a place once," Elowen said. "Not like this. There wasn't a place like this. But someone held a door open for me in the way they could." She paused. "Father-in-law, when I was younger, taught me a trade when nobody else thought I needed one. That trade is the reason I'm sitting here right now." She looked at her tea. "You don't forget the people who treat you like you have a future." The woman was quiet for a moment. The child stirred on her shoulder and resettled, making the soft sound of someone renegotiating with sleep. "I don't know how long I can stay," the woman said. "You can stay as long as you need to figure out the next thing," Elowen said. "And Ruth, the woman who showed you in, she knows what's available in this county better than most. She'll talk through it with you when you're ready. Not before." The woman looked at the table, at the tea, at nothing in particular. "Thank you," she said, quietly, as though she was slightly out of practice saying it. "You're welcome," Elowen said. She poured herself more tea and didn't say anything else, because there was nothing else that needed saying tonight, and sometimes the most useful thing you can offer a person is the absence of a requirement. She went back to Ironwood at 9 o'clock. The summer moved the way summers do when you're working hard enough that the weeks have a shape to them, not fast, but forward, each one adding to something that wasn't there before. Mercy House had guests with some regularity by July. Not a flood, not the dramatic transformation that stories like to impose on things that are actually gradual and complicated. A woman who needed 3 days and left with a better plan than she'd arrived with. 2 sisters traveling west with a sick child who stayed a week while the child recovered. A girl of 17 whose situation Elowen didn't ask about in detail and didn't need to because Ruth understood it and knew what to do and did it with the same direct practicality she brought to everything. It was not a perfect operation. Things went wrong. A woman who had been there for 2 weeks and seemed stable left suddenly one morning without explanation, taking a blanket that wasn't hers and leaving behind a note that said only sorry, which was heartbreaking in the way that things are when you've put effort into them and can't control what people do with what you offer. There were nights when Elowen sat in the main room and wondered if she was doing it right, whether Meg Rourke's ledger would recognize what had been built from it, or whether it was something different enough to constitute a different thing. She said this to Clara once, in early August, sitting on the porch bench in the evening. Clara looked at her for a moment. "Meg didn't know how to do this perfectly either," she said. "She spent years planning it because she was afraid of doing it wrong." She paused. "She never started. You started." Elowen sat with that. "Starting imperfectly is still starting," Clara said. "And imperfect things that exist do more good than perfect things that don't." It was, Elowen thought, the most words she'd heard Clara say in a single breath about anything that wasn't organizational in nature. She suspected Clara had been holding that sentence for a while. "I know," Elowen said. "Then stop second-guessing it," Clara said. "Fix what you can fix and accept what you can't." Ironwood was different too by August, in ways that were less dramatic than what had happened in April, but in some ways more lasting. The financial breathing room that Colton Marsh's payment had created allowed Silas to hire on 2 additional hands, which meant the work was distributed more evenly, and the horses received better attention, and Hector's expression over breakfast began to carry the slightly less compressed quality of a man who can see to, for the first time in a while. Silas had taken on a second contract smaller than the first, 8 horses over a 6-week period, and the work was going smoothly, partly because the sabotage and the tension of the Crow situation were gone, and partly because Elowen had shod horses in this place long enough now that she and the animals understood each other. Sister, the Blue Roan had become almost easy. Not easy in the sense of effortless. She still needed more time and more patience than most horses, and probably always would. Because some patterns get into an animal deeply enough that they don't fully go away. They just get layered over by better experiences. But she stood without pulling now. She breathed evenly through the sound of the hammer. When Eloin's hands ran down her legs, she dropped her head instead of raising it. It was not nothing. That was everything. Lucian Crow's trial began in September, in the county seat, before Judge Pryor and a jury that Clara described, with a satisfaction she made no attempt to conceal, as not the kind Crow would have been able to buy. Charges were substantial: fraud, forgery, conspiracy to defraud property owners, manipulation of loan instruments. His lawyer was skilled, and the proceedings were slow, and there were days when the legal architecture of it seemed to move backward rather than forward. But the documents were what they were. A dead notary's signature on papers dated after his death is not a thing that legal skill can explain into acceptability. And Arthur Fenwick's death certificate had been entered into evidence on the second day, alongside 4 forged deeds and a stack of correspondence between Crow and the 2 bank officers who had helped him structure the loan irregularities. The 2 bank officers had cooperated with the investigation. Crow had not. The Henderson family attended 2 days of the trial. Jim Henderson was 68, and his wife was unwell, as Silas had said, but she came anyway. The particular determination of a woman who has been wronged and wants to be present when the wronging is addressed. Eloin sat with them on the second afternoon, which was the afternoon the forged deeds were entered into evidence one by one, and the courtroom listened to Cross explain, in his careful investigator's language, the street name discrepancy and the dead notary's seal, and the pattern it formed across 5 separate properties. Jim Henderson's wife gripped her husband's hand when the 4th deed was read out. Eloin sat on Jim Henderson's other side and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the documents weren't already saying. Crow was convicted on all primary charges in the 3rd week of September. The sentencing followed 2 weeks later. 7 years, plus financial restitution to all 5 affected properties to be paid from the seizure of his assets, which were, it turned out, considerable. He had been doing this in various forms for longer than the 5 properties in Millhaven County, and the investigation that Cross's office opened in the wake of the conviction reached into 2 other counties before it was done. The 3 ranches that had settled received letters from the district court informing them of their right to file for restitution. The Hendersons filed, the Hartley family filed. The 3rd family, whose name Eloin had found in the records but never met, filed through a lawyer in their county seat. All 3 claims were accepted. She found out about the Henderson restitution in a letter that Jim Henderson sent to Ironwood, addressed to Silas, with a postscript that said, "Please pass our thanks to Mrs. Vance. She knows what she did." Silas handed her the letter over breakfast without comment. She read the postscript, folded it. "I'll write them back," she said. She did. That evening, at the table in the main office where she and Silas had written letters before, she wrote to Jim Henderson and his wife not a long letter, not a letter full of things about what she'd done or what had happened, but a letter about what she hoped for them, which was specific and considered, and said in her own plain words, rather than the polished language that people sometimes use when they're writing about hope because they're afraid that plain words aren't enough. Plain words, she had found, were usually the only ones that reached. Silas read it before she sealed it. He said nothing for a moment when he finished. "Then you write the way you talk. Is that a criticism?" she said. "No," he said. "It's why it'll reach them." She sealed the letter. It was October by then, and the light had shifted into the particular quality of early autumn in that country, thinner, colder in the mornings, with a clarity to the afternoons that summer's heat obscures, the kind of light that makes distances look exact instead of approximate. Mercy House had a small iron stove in the south room now, which Otto had installed for a price that she suspected was below what he would have charged someone else, and the kitchen was properly stocked for the first time. And Clara's committee had organized a schedule of rotating volunteers who came to sit with guests when Eloin or Ruth couldn't be there. The woman who had come 4 days after the opening, the young woman with the child, had stayed for 9 days. When she left, she had a plan. A sister 2 counties east who had agreed to take her in, a letter Ruth had helped her write, and enough money for the stage fare that had come from a collection Clara had organized without announcing as such, just described as available if it was needed. She came back once, in September, to show Elowen the child, who was walking now, lurching between furniture with the magnificent recklessness of a small person who has recently discovered that legs exist and has not yet fully negotiated with gravity. She brought a jar of preserved peaches from her sister's orchard, which Elowen accepted without the awkwardness that sometimes comes from receiving things, because the giving and the receiving were both straightforward, and that was how it should be. "You look better," Elowen said. "I am better," the woman said. And then, because she was honest in the way of someone who has stopped having the energy for anything else, not all the way. "But better, that's the direction," Elowen said. The woman left. Elowen put the peaches on the kitchen shelf and thought about directions the way they don't reveal themselves all at once, the way you only know you've been going the right way by looking back at where you were. In November, Silas asked her to build a life with him. He did it without ceremony, in the same way she had done most of the important things she'd done since arriving at Ironwood directly, without performing the moment. They were in the yard in the early evening, not doing anything in particular, just the shared proximity that had gradually become the natural order of things between them. And he said it the way you say something you've been carrying for a while and have decided to put down. "I know you don't need this," he said. "I know you don't need me, or the ranch, or a name attached to yours, or any of the things people usually mean when they ask this question." She looked at him. "I'm asking anyway," he said, "because I want to, and because I think you know what I mean by it, which is not what most people mean." She was quiet for a moment. She thought about Thomas. At the important moments, not with guilt and not with longing exactly, but with the particular acknowledgement of a life that had shaped her into what she was, including the parts that had been hard, and the parts that had not been his fault, and the parts that had been, and all of it adding up to a woman who could walk into a corral alone and convince a terrified horse that the world was survivable. She thought about what Silas had said in the office months ago, that knowing someone is trustworthy and being certain of it aren't the same thing, that you make a judgment and you live with what it costs if you're wrong. She thought about the fact that what she felt in Silas's company was not the feeling of needing someone. It was the feeling of choosing someone, which is an entirely different thing, and one that she had not fully experienced before, because the circumstances of her life had not previously allowed it. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "That's my answer," she said. "Yes." He reached out and took her hand, which was calloused and scarred at the thumb from a tool slip 2 months ago, and not the hand of a woman who had spent her life being decorative, and he held it the way you hold something you know has weight to it, and don't want to pretend otherwise. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. They stood in the yard as the light finished going out of the sky, and neither of them said anything more, because the thing had been said, and it was enough, and some moments are not improved by additional words. What she thought, standing there, was this: that she had arrived at Ironwood with everything she owned in a flour sack and a hammer at her side, and she had not arrived looking to be rescued or looking to rescue anyone else. She had arrived looking for work, because work was the thing she knew how to do and the thing that had kept her upright through everything that had tried to put her down. And the work had led to everything else, not because the work was magic, not because anything had gone smoothly or according to plan, because she had shown up for it every day with the full weight of what she knew and what she was, and that turned out to be enough. Not more than enough. Just enough. That is, she had come to believe what most things require. The photograph of Thomas was still on the shelf in the converted storage room that had been her home for 7 months. She had looked at it every day, not always for long, not always with the same feeling. The feeling changing as things change the way grief changes, not disappearing but shifting. Becoming something you can live alongside rather than something living inside you. She had talked to it sometimes, which she knew was not something she needed to explain or justify. You say the things you need to say. You find the audience available. That winter, she moved her things from the bunkhouse to the main house. Not much. Still, 2 changes of clothes, a whetstone, a blanket she didn't need anymore, because there were better blankets now, and the photograph, which she put on the shelf by the east window in the room that caught the morning light, face up, because she had decided at some point that face up was where it belonged. Midnight Mercy, through all of it, had been the constant. By the second winter at Ironwood, the black mare had become one of the finest working horses on the ranch, sure-footed, responsive, with the particular quality that develops in an animal that has worked through fear and arrived at something on the other side of it. The hands no longer called her Black Fury. They called her Mercy, which they had shortened from Midnight Mercy, the way names get shortened when they're used often enough to become familiar. She was still especially attached to Elowen. This did not diminish it, simply became part of the fact of the place, unremarkable in the way that things become unremarkable when they are consistently true. Every morning when Elowen crossed the yard, Mercy tracked her from the corral with her head up and her ears forward until Elowen came to the fence. And then the mare pressed her face against whatever surface was available, which was usually Elowen's shoulder and occasionally her coat pocket, which she had investigated thoroughly enough to know it sometimes contained apple pieces. The morning after Elowen said yes to Silas, she went to the corral first thing, before breakfast, before anything. Put her hand on Mercy's face. The mare breathed against her palm. "I know," Elowen said. "Things are going to change a little." The mare's ear swiveled. "Not the important parts," Elowen said. She stood at the fence in the cold November morning, with the light just starting, and her breath making small clouds in the air, and she thought about what she had come through to get here, not the distance in miles, though that was part of it, but the other distance, the kind that doesn't show on any map. The distance between a woman who has no choice and a woman who does, between surviving and deciding, between being used as what you appear to be and being seen for what you actually are. She had not made that journey without cost, the debts, the months alone, the rumors that had followed her through a town that reduced her to her face because her face was easier to read than her hands, the horses she'd had to fight to treat well, the nights she'd lain on a cot in a converted storage room talking to a photograph because there was no one else available. None of that was pretty. None of it was the version of the story that gets cleaned up and made inspirational, the version where struggle is a straight line from suffering to triumph, and the protagonist emerges shining. She was not shining. She was tired in the bones, the way you get tired when you've been working hard for years, and she had the thumb scar and the shoulder ache and the particular kind of emotional vigilance that comes from having been hurt enough times that it doesn't entirely go away. It just becomes something you know how to work around. She was here, and here was real. That is what she would have said if anyone had asked her what she'd learned. Not a lesson exactly. She had always been suspicious of lessons, of the way people wrap experience into tidy conclusions, as though life is a problem that gets solved. More an observation. The observation is this, that the thing most worth protecting in a person is not their comfort, not their safety, not even their happiness. It is their capacity to choose. The ability to act from a position that is yours, not one that has been built around you by someone else's interests or assumptions or fears. Crow had tried to take that from the ranchers in that valley. He had succeeded with some of them and failed with others, and the difference in most cases was not strength or cleverness or money. It was the time to see what was being done and the space to respond to it rather than simply absorb it. She had given herself time by refusing to be rushed, by reading every document all the way through, by staying in a corral with a terrified horse until the horse decided to trust her rather than forcing the issue. You cannot rush the things that matter. You can only create the conditions for them and then be present when they're ready. Mercy nosed her pocket. "All right," Elowen said, and found the apple piece. She stood at the fence in the early morning light of a November day, at a ranch that had been saved not by any single dramatic act but by the daily, grinding, unglamorous accumulation of doing the right thing in the right way for 12 days, and then the days after that, and she thought about Meg Rourke's ledger on the table in the south room of Mercy House, and the women who had slept in that room, and the women who would sleep there in the future, and the door that Otto had hung so that it swung open easily for anyone who pushed it. She thought about all the things that had been hurt long enough to learn to fight before they learned to trust. And she thought, that's the work. That's always been the work. Not fixing what's broken with force, but staying long enough and being steady enough that the broken thing has a chance to decide, on its own terms, that the world might be worth trusting after all. It is slow work. It is not glamorous. It does not always succeed. But it is the only work worth doing. The The sun came up over the ridge, and the light hit the yard, and the horses moved in their stalls and somewhere across the yard. Denny called something to Hector, and Hector said something back that she couldn't make out, but the tone of it was easy. The tone of men doing their work without the weight of crisis pressing down on it. And Midnight Mercy raised her head and breathed the cold morning air, and Eowyn stood at the fence with her scarred hands and her level head and her one good hammer and everything at last, that was fully, completely, irreversibly hers.